Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. The quiet call of the mountain owl. Prologue. The watcher in the pines. High on the northern ridge, where the pines whisper like monks reciting sutras, the mountain slept beneath a veil of twilight. It was here, in a clearing untouched by time, that the owl made its dwelling. Its eyes, twin pools of amber, glowed with patience. Its wings, broad and silent, seemed made not for flight but for shadow. Each night, as the moon rose, the owl called once soft, deliberate, eternal. Few heard it. Fewer still understood. For the call was not meant for human ears alone. It was a reminder, a thread binding past to present, a summons to those willing to walk the path between the seen and the unseen. In the village nestled at the mountain's base, life continued with the rhythm of rice planting and harvest, of festivals and funerals. Yet when the owl's voice drifted down the slopes, elders would pause, their hands tightening on prayer beads. They remembered stories half legend, half warning of the bird that called only when change was near. And so it was, one autumn evening, when a boy named Haru stood by the withered persimmon tree outside his home. The first stars pricked the velvet sky, and from the mountain came a sound low, resonant, filled with both loneliness and promise. Hoo-hoo. Haru felt it in his chest, a tremor more than a sound. He did not know then that the call was for him. But the mountain did. Chapter 1. The Boy and the Echo. The village of Minakawa was neither large nor small. Wooden houses leaned close together as if huddling against the mountain winds, their thatched roofs patched with moss. Beyond them stretched paddies that in autumn mirrored the sky with pale gold, each ripple of wind sending shivers across the fields. Haru lived at the edge, where the path to the forest began. His father was a carpenter, hands rough with cedar dust, and his mother wove cloth dyed in indigo. Haru himself was 13, restless as sparrows at dawn. He liked to wander where other children feared the creek at dusk, the shrine steps at night, the cedar grove where old offerings crumbled beneath leaves. That evening, after the owl's call, Haru could not sleep. He lay on the thin futon, staring at the rafters, listening to his parents' steady breathing. Yet the echo of that who pressed against his ribs like a secret he was meant to answer. At last, he rose, slipped into his sandals, and stepped outside. The air was sharp with autumn. Crickets sang from the grass. Lanterns had been extinguished in most houses, but the moon gave enough light to guide his way. Haru walked toward the forest, past the persimmon tree heavy with fruit, past the shrine whose paper streamers fluttered like pale wings. Each step seemed to deepen the silence. Even the insects quieted as he neared the pines. Then, hoo-hoo, it came again, closer now, as though the mountain itself exhaled through the owl's throat. Haru stopped, heart hammering. The sound carried weight, as if summoning him forward. He followed. Through undergrowth slick with dew, over roots coiled like sleeping serpents, until at last he reached a clearing bathed in moonlight. And there high upon a branch of ancient pine sat the owl. Its gaze met his. For a breathless instant, Haru felt himself seen, not as a boy but as something smaller, more fragile, yet also more infinite. The owl called once more. Not loud, not sharp, but deep, like the earth remembering rain. And in that sound, Haru felt a promise. That his life, so ordinary in the village below, would no longer remain untouched by the mountain's voice. Chapter 2: The Shrine in the Mist. Morning drifted into Minakawa village not with the blare of bells or the bustle of merchants, but with the hush of fog rolling down from the mountain. The mist softened the edges of rooftops, turned the rice paddies into silver sheets, and wrapped the paths in silence. Haru walked along one such path, his sandals wet with dew. He had slept little after the encounter in the clearing, yet his heart pulsed with a strange alertness. The owl's gaze haunted him, not with fear but with insistence, as though the bird had passed something into him, a question, a duty, perhaps even a warning. The villagers crept through the fog. Women carried buckets of water balanced on bamboo poles. Old men stooped to inspect the paddies, muttering about harvest. A group of children chased each other, their laughter muffled, darting like shadows among the huts. As Haru passed the persimmon tree, he paused. Its fruit, heavy and red, seemed to glow in the mist. He thought of the owl again, its amber eyes, its voice that seemed woven from night itself. His feet carried him up the stone steps to the shrine without decision. It was the same shrine he had often played near as a child, daring himself and friends to climb the crumbling torii gate or to peek into the dark offertory box. Yet today the shrine seemed different. The mist clung to its roof like a veil. The paper streamers, damp with dew, hung limp and silent. A crow cawed once from the eaves, then fell silent, as though even its voice was unwelcome here. Haru bowed, awkwardly but sincerely. His parents prayed here at festivals, but he himself had never felt the urge. Now, though, he sensed that the shrine was listening. "Why me?" he whispered, not sure if he addressed the god of the shrine, the owl in the pines, or the mountain itself. No answer came, only the drip of water from the eaves. Yet as he turned to leave, he noticed something unusual: footprints, faint but clear, leading away from the shrine into the forest. They were not made by any villager, too deep, too precise, like impressions left in soft clay rather than soil. Haru crouched, tracing one with his finger. It was not shaped like a human foot, nor exactly like an animal's. More like a symbol pressed into the earth, a curve and a circle, as if the ground itself bore writing. The mist thickened, swallowing the path ahead. Haru's breath quickened. Something in him longed to follow, to discover where the marks led. But a voice broke the stillness. Haru. It was his mother, calling from the edge of the paddies. Her voice, sharp with worry, snapped the thread of enchantment. Haru glanced once more at the footprints. When he looked up again, the mist had shifted, and they were gone, absorbed into the earth as though they had never been. He hurried down the steps, the echo of the owl's call still lingering in his chest. Chapter 3: The Elder's Tale. That evening, the mist lifted, revealing a sky brushed with faint crimson before nightfall. The villagers gathered in the square, where lanterns flickered like fireflies against the dusk. It was the time of the harvest meeting, when elders shared news and families prepared offerings for the season's festival. Haru sat at the edge of the crowd, restless. His parents busied themselves with talk of rice yields and repairs to the water wheel. But Haru's mind wandered back to the footprints at the shrine and the unyielding gaze of the owl. He could not forget either. As the chatter dimmed, one of the oldest men in the village rose. His name was Elder Kenzo. His back was bent like a bow, and his voice carried the weight of many winters. Children often teased him for speaking slowly, but when silence fell, even the crows seemed to wait for his words. "This mountain," Kenzo began, tapping the ground with his staff, "breathes with us. We harvest its water, its soil, its wood. But we forget it has a heart of its own." Some villagers nodded. Others glanced away, impatient for the practical matters of rice storage. Kenzo's gaze, however, swept across them all, then settled unexpectedly on Haru. "Long ago," he continued, "there was said to be a watcher of this mountain. Not man, not beast, but a bridge between the two. Its form was seen in the night, its voice heard when change was near. The owl of the pines." A murmur stirred the crowd. Mothers clutched their children. Younger men scoffed quietly, muttering that such tales belonged to grandmothers by the hearth. But Haru's breath caught in his throat. Kenzo leaned on his staff. It was said that when the owl called, someone would be chosen not by the village, but by the mountain itself. Chosen to listen, to carry what others had forgotten. Haru felt heat rise in his face, though no one looked at him. Only Kenzo's eyes, sharp despite his years, seemed to pierce through the crowd and fix upon him. The elder's voice dropped, low and deliberate. "And those who ignored the call often found their fields barren, their houses cold, their lives shortened by misfortune. But those who listened, truly listened, found a different path. Harder, perhaps. Yet one that gave the village back its breath." Silence followed, heavy as snow. A child whimpered, quickly hushed. Then, with a sigh, Kenzo lowered himself to sit again. "We speak of rice and wood, of tools and trade. Yet without listening, all these vanish like smoke. Remember this. The meeting soon ended, and the villagers dispersed into the night. Laughter returned, though softer, as lanterns bobbed along the paths back to their homes. Haru lingered, his mind racing. Could the owl's gaze, the strange footprints, the weight in his chest all be part of what Kenzo spoke? Was he truly being called? As he turned toward home, he felt it again. Not a sound, but a pressure in the air, like wings passing overhead, though nothing stirred. Somewhere in the dark pines above, the owl was watching. Chapter 4 Into the Pines. The following days carried the scent of harvest bundles of rice laid out to dry, smoke rising from hearths, the air sharp with the promise of colder nights. Yet for Haru, each day felt stretched, taut with an invisible thread tugging him upward toward the mountain. The owl's call came nightly now. Sometimes faint, sometimes so near that Haru swore he felt its wings brush the air above his roof. Each time, his chest tightened with the same mixture of fear and longing. One morning, before dawn, he rose quietly, slipping past his sleeping parents. The village still slumbered. A faint mist lingered, clinging to the paddies, and stars faded into the paling sky. Haru carried only a small pouch of rice balls and a gourd of water. He told no one where he went. The path into the pines was steep. Stones slick with dew threatened to trip him, and the roots curled like claws across the soil. But Haru pressed on, guided by instinct more than sight. With each step, the village sounds, dogs barking, roosters crowing faded, replaced by the hush of trees breathing. The deeper he went, the more the forest seemed alive. The air was cool, thick with resin and damp earth. Birds stirred briefly, then quieted as if to watch him pass. A squirrel darted across his path and vanished. Every sound, every shift of shadow, seemed to press closer, urging him deeper. At last, the pines opened into a small clearing. Sunlight speared through in pale beams, painting the ground in silver dust. In the center lay a stone basin, half buried in moss, filled with clear water. Its surface rippled, though no wind stirred. Haru approached, kneeling beside it. His reflection wavered on the water's surface, young and uncertain, but behind it, he froze. For in the ripples, faint yet undeniable, another image appeared, the wide amber eyes of an owl. The call came then, low and resonant, though no bird sat upon the branches. Hoo-hoo, it thrummed in Haru's bones. He clutched the edge of the basin, heart racing. "I hear you," he whispered, unsure whether the words left his lips or only his thoughts. "But what do you want from me?" The water rippled again. This time, shapes moved beneath the surface, not clear, but enough to stir the imagination, the outline of trees, a village roof, a boy's shadow stretched long. Then, just as quickly, it stilled. A sudden rustle broke the silence. Haru turned sharply. From the far side of the clearing, an old fox stood watching him. Its fur was silvered with age, its eyes narrow but not unkind. For a moment, Haru felt certain the animal understood him. Then, without sound, it slipped into the trees and vanished. The owl's call echoed once more, farther now, drawing him beyond the clearing. Haru rose, clutching his pouch. Though his legs trembled, he stepped after the sound. The pines closed behind him like a gate. Chapter 5: The Trial Beneath the Moon. Night fell swiftly in the mountains. By the time Haru realized how far he had wandered, the pines were cloaked in darkness, their trunks rising like endless pillars. The path had long since disappeared, if ever it had existed at all. Yet fear did not overwhelm him. Instead, a strange calm settled in his chest, as if the owl's call had replaced his heartbeat. The moon rose high, its silver light seeping through branches and painting the forest floor in broken patches. Haru stumbled into another clearing, larger than the first, where stones stood in a rough circle. Some leaned as though toppled by time, others were etched with moss and faint carvings that shimmered in the moonlight. At the circle's center lay a flat stone, its surface scarred but smooth, as if countless hands had touched it over generations. The owl's call rang out louder than ever, clear and resonant. Hoo-hoo. This time, the sound was everywhere, surrounding him. The air vibrated with it. Haru clutched his pouch, trembling. "Why me?" he cried aloud, his voice cracking. "I am just a boy. What can I do for you?" The silence that followed was heavy until the wind rose suddenly through the pines. The branches shuddered, scattering needles across the clearing. The stones seemed to hum, their carvings glowing faintly. Haru's vision blurred. The world shifted. He stood no longer in a clearing but in a vision. The circle of stones dissolved into fields of rice, golden and endless. Villagers bent to harvest, and laughter carried on the breeze. But slowly, the fields darkened. Water receded. The stalks shriveled. The laughter faded into cries. And above it all, the owl's call echoed like a lament. Haru gasped, clutching his chest. Then the vision shifted again. He saw the same village, the same fields, but this time, water shimmered in the paddies, lanterns glowed along the paths, and children ran with joy. At the edge of the fields, the owl perched on a pine, silent, watching. The images dissolved, leaving only the moonlit clearing once more. Haru collapsed to his knees, shaking. He understood little, but enough. The owl's call was not simply for him, but for the village, for the bond between people and mountain that had been forgotten. A voice, low and resonant, spoke within the air, not quite words, not quite thought, but something in between. "Listen. Remember. Carry." Haru bowed his head, tears pricking his eyes. "I will," he whispered. "Even if I don't understand, I will." The wind stilled. The owl called once more, softer now, almost like approval. "Who?" And then silence. The forest returned to stillness, the stones nothing more than moss and shadow. But Haru knew something within him had changed. The mountain had tested him, and though he felt no triumph, he had not turned away. Chapter 6: The Weight of Silence. When Haru returned to Minakawa, dawn was breaking. The mountain mist clung to his hair and clothes, and his feet were raw from walking barefoot after losing a sandal in the forest. He stumbled down the familiar path, past the persimmon tree, into the village square. A few villagers were already awake, carrying bundles of kindling or leading oxen toward the fields. They stopped when they saw him mud-smeared, trembling, eyes wide with something between awe and exhaustion. "Haru?" one woman asked. "Where have you been?" Haru tried to speak, but his throat felt thick. He wanted to tell them everything: the stones, the visions, the owl's call that seemed to echo through his very bones. Yet as he opened his mouth, the words came out tangled, too large for language. "The owl," he whispered hoarsely. "The mountain," it spoke. "We must listen." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. A man muttered, "He's been wandering in the forest too long." Another shook his head, whispering of spirits leading boys astray. By the time Haru's parents came running, worry etched across their faces, the whispers had spread. That evening, his father sat heavily by the hearth, staring into the flames. "Haru," he said quietly, "you must not speak of such things. People will think you're touched by madness." "But it's true," Haru insisted, voice breaking. "The mountain showed me our fields will wither if we do not listen. The owl's call is a warning." His father's jaw tightened. His mother placed a hand on Haru's shoulder, her eyes soft but fearful. "Perhaps you only dreamed, Haru. The mountain can play tricks when the night is long." "No," Haru cried, tears stinging his eyes. "It wasn't a dream. I saw it. I heard it." But their silence pressed heavier than denial. In the days that followed, Haru walked among the villagers with the weight of the vision heavy in his chest. Yet when he spoke of it, they turned away. Some pitied him. Others mocked him. Children whispered, calling him Owl Boy. Only Elder Kenzo watched him with quiet eyes. One evening, as lanterns flickered against the dusk, Haru found himself alone outside the shrine. The paper streamers fluttered, and the air smelled faintly of pine. He bowed deeply, his voice breaking into the silence. "Why me? Why give me this if no one will believe?" The answer came not in words, but in absence. The mountain did not speak. The owl did not call. The silence itself was the reply, heavy, unyielding. Haru sank to his knees, feeling smaller than ever, a boy pressed beneath the weight of something far older than himself. And yet, even in that silence, he knew he could not turn away. For once the owl's call had entered his chest, there was no returning to ignorance. Chapter 7: The Night of Lanterns. Autumn descended swiftly on Minakawa. The air grew sharper, the nights longer. In the fields, rice stalks bent heavy with grain, yet the villagers whispered uneasily of thinning harvests, of storms that came at odd hours. Despite this, the Festival of Lanterns approached, as it did every year, a night when villagers honored their ancestors by floating glowing lanterns down the river. Children laughed as they painted bright designs. Elders recited poems to be tied to the bamboo poles, and vendors prepared sweet chestnuts for the crowd. To all, it was a time of joy. To Haru, it was something else entirely. For each night as the moon rose, the call of the owl echoed through his dreams, sharper now, urgent. He saw visions of lanterns floating not on the river, but through blackened water, their lights dimming one by one until only silence remained. On the evening of the festival, the village gathered along the riverbank. The reflection of countless lanterns shimmered across the surface like stars fallen from the sky. Drums beat, children danced, and laughter rolled like waves. But Haru felt none of it. His chest ached, his breath shallow. Elder Kenzo approached him quietly, leaning on his staff. "You are troubled," Kenzo said, eyes narrowing like a man who already knew the answer. Haru nodded. "The owl calls every night. It warns me the river, the harvest, the mountain itself. I fear something will happen." Kenzo sighed, his breath curling in the crisp air. "When I was a boy, I too heard the owl. No one believed me, and so I remained silent. I have regretted it ever since." Haru's eyes widened. "You heard it too?" The elder nodded. "The owl chooses those who can bear its silence. You must act, Haru, even if the village scorns you. For if you remain silent, the silence will devour us all." Before Haru could respond, a murmur rippled through the crowd. The lanterns, freshly set afloat, flickered strangely. Their flames bent as though pulled by unseen breath. A sudden wind swept through, scattering petals and sending the lanterns drifting into the reeds. Then, from the mountain, the owl's cry rang out, not soft, not distant, but piercing and immediate, echoing over the water. The villagers froze, their laughter collapsing into silence. Some crossed themselves, others whispered prayers. Haru stepped forward, his voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "Do you hear it now?" he shouted. "The owl calls to us. We must listen, leave the river, return to the mountain. The land itself warns us." The villagers stared, torn between fear and doubt. His father moved as if to silence him, but the elder raised a hand. "Haru speaks truth," Kenzo declared, his voice firm despite his frailty. "The owl has chosen him. We must heed the warning." At that very moment, the river swelled. Water surged against its banks, soaking the feet of those gathered too close. The lanterns spun wildly, their flames sputtering out one by one until the night grew darker. Cries broke out as families clutched their children, pulling back from the water. Haru, heart pounding, stood tall for the first time. The silence was no longer heavy, it was listening. And within it, he felt not only fear, but also purpose. Final chapter: The Mountain's Answer. The river churned in the darkness, swollen as if the mountain itself had breathed into its veins. Lanterns that had once floated serenely now bobbed in chaos, flames extinguished by spray. Villagers huddled together, their faces pale with fear, whispering prayers to gods and ancestors alike. And still, above it all, came the owl's call. Deep, resonant, ancient. Haru stood at the edge of the water, his bare feet numb against the cold stones. For the first time, no one mocked him, no one turned away. All eyes were on him, the boy once dismissed as a dreamer and fool, now the sole figure unshaken before the storm. He closed his eyes and listened. The silence between calls spoke as loudly as the cries themselves. He remembered the shrine hidden in the pines, the way the wind had curved around the old stones, the stillness of the forest that was not absence but presence. He understood at last the owl was not calling him to fear, but to remember. To restore the balance the village had forgotten. "Elder," Haru said softly, turning to Kenzo. "The shrine. The stones are broken. The mountain waits for us to make them whole again." Kenzo's eyes glistened with tears. "Yes. You see what I once could not." The villagers murmured uneasily. To leave the river in flood, to climb into the dark forest at night, seemed madness. Yet something in Haru's voice stilled their doubts. The boy who once stumbled beneath the weight of silence now carried it with the steadiness of stone. Led by Haru and the elder, they climbed. Lanterns, hastily lit anew, bobbed in trembling hands as the procession wound its way up the mountain path. The wind whistled through bamboo groves, branches snapped under unseen weight. Children clung to their mothers. Men carried staffs and tools, uncertain of what awaited them. When at last they reached the hidden shrine, the air grew still. The broken stones lay as Haru had seen them before, fragments of what once was whole. The owl's call echoed above, not menacing but solemn, like the tolling of a great bell. Haru stepped forward, kneeling before the stones. His hands, though small and shaking, began to lift the fragments. Others followed, men and women who only hours before had doubted him. Together, piece by piece, they began to rebuild. The night stretched long. Sweat mingled with cold, breath clouded the air, but slowly the shrine rose again. The villagers placed offerings of rice, sake, and flowers. The final stone, placed by Haru's trembling hands, settled with a weight that seemed to ripple through the mountain itself. And then, silence. The owl did not call. The wind did not stir. For a moment, the entire mountain held its breath. Then, as if released, the river's roar below softened. The swollen waters eased, their fury ebbing into a steady current. Clouds parted, and moonlight spilled across the shrine, silvering every stone. The villagers wept. Some knelt. Others embraced. Haru, exhausted, sank to the ground. He felt no triumph, only quiet belonging. He had carried the silence, and now the silence had answered. Elder Kenzo placed a hand upon his shoulder. "You have done what I could not, Haru. You listened. You bore the burden of disbelief. The mountain will remember you." Haru looked up at the moon, its reflection glimmering faintly on the wet stones. For the first time since the owl's cry had entered his life, his chest felt light. The silence of the mountain was no longer heavy. It was harmony. And in that harmony, Haru knew, the village would endure. Shadows along the temple wall. Prologue: the fading light. The temple of Shirinji stood on the slope of a low mountain, its tiled roof catching the last pale embers of the setting sun. Around its perimeter stretched a high wall of plastered stone, weathered by centuries of rain and wind. In autumn, when the sun tilted low, the wall carried strange shapes, shadows that stretched and bent, whispering of things beyond the ordinary gaze. Villagers who passed by at dusk often lowered their heads, some muttering prayers, others quickening their pace. Children, curious yet afraid, would glance sideways and swear that the silhouettes did not always match the trees around them. It was here, against this wall, that the story begins, with a boy lingering after the evening bell. His gaze fixed on the shifting forms, as though the shadows spoke to him alone. Chapter 1: The Boy at the Wall. Haru was 12 when he first began to notice the shadows. He came each evening to sweep the temple courtyard, his thin hands red from the cool wind that slid down from the mountains. The monks treated him kindly enough, offering bowls of rice and miso, but they spoke little. His parents had sent him here in the hope that discipline might steady his restless nature. As he swept, his eyes often wandered to the long wall that enclosed the temple grounds. When the sun began to sink, the wall shifted from pale ivory to dusky gold, then to deep gray. Upon that surface moved shadows that did not always seem his own. Sometimes he saw branches swaying where no trees grew. Sometimes the outline of a lantern bobbed, though no one carried it. Once, he thought he glimpsed the silhouette of a kneeling figure. Its head bowed, hands pressed together in silent prayer, yet when he turned, the space behind him was empty. He said nothing of these visions. The monks valued silence, and his parents had warned him not to indulge in fantasies. Still, he felt drawn each evening to linger a little longer, to watch the wall until the last trace of light dissolved into night. On one such evening, as the bell sounded from the main hall, Haru laid aside his broom and approached the wall. His breath formed small clouds in the gathering chill. The shadows rippled faintly, as though stirred by an unseen hand. Haru. The voice was low, almost indistinct, but it seemed to come from within the wall itself. He froze, his heart pounding. Who's there? No answer came. Only the hush of wind through pine needles, only the fading cry of the bell rolling over the valley. Yet Haru could not shake the sense that someone watched him from the darkness etched into the plaster. That night, he dreamed of walking along the temple wall, lantern in hand, as countless shadows gathered before him like silent pilgrims. Chapter 2: The Whispering Wall. The following days brought a deepening chill. The maples along the temple path flamed crimson, their leaves scattering across the stones like sparks falling from a fire. Haru swept them dutifully, yet his eyes always strayed to the wall. The monks noticed his distraction but said nothing. Their discipline taught them that a boy must confront his own restlessness. Haru, for his part, began to sense that the wall held secrets only he could hear. On the seventh evening after his dream, as twilight seeped into the valley, Haru lingered once more. The wall glowed faintly in the last light, its surface mottled with shadows too complex for mere branches. A sound rose soft, like breath against the ear. At first, he thought it was wind, but then words took shape, indistinct yet deliberate. "Do you see us?" Haru's broom clattered from his hand. His heart thundered. "Who are you?" he whispered. The shadows rippled, and in their shifting shapes he thought he glimpsed outlines of faces old, weary, yet not unkind. "We are those who remain." The words came not from a single voice but from many, layered upon one another, carried on the currents of dusk. Haru's knees trembled. He wanted to run to the monks, yet something rooted him in place. "Why do you speak to me?" The shadows deepened, curling like smoke. "Because you listen." Then, as the bell tolled the hour, the whispers faded. The wall returned to its stillness, the shadows indistinguishable from any other at nightfall. Haru stood frozen until the cold forced him to move. He gathered his broom and stumbled toward the quarters, his mind a whirl of questions. That night, lying on his thin futon, he heard faint echoes in his dreams like countless voices overlapping, murmuring of forgotten prayers. And though fear twisted in his chest, another feeling grew stronger, a strange, undeniable pull toward the shadows that had chosen him. Chapter 3: The Lantern Bearer. The temple's autumn festival drew near, when lanterns would be lit and carried along the mountain path to honor the spirits of ancestors. For weeks, the monks prepared repairing banners, polishing bells, gathering pine torches. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation. Haru, though assigned to sweep the courtyard and polish the offering bowls, felt restless. His mind lingered not on the festival, but on the voices that whispered from the wall. Each night, he returned secretly, hoping for words, for guidance. Sometimes the shadows stirred, sometimes they lay silent. He always left with more questions than answers. On the evening of the festival, the monks and villagers gathered in the courtyard, lanterns glowing like small suns in the dusk. The smell of incense curled upward, mingling with the cool scent of pine. Haru was given a small lantern of his own, its paper sides painted with the shape of a crane. As the procession began, he walked at the edge, the glow of his lantern trembling on the stones. When they passed along the temple wall, he felt it again, the pull, the quiet stirring in the plaster. Shadows lengthened, reaching toward his flickering light. Suddenly, the flame of his lantern flared brighter, casting long shapes upon the wall. And in that light, Haru saw a figure standing within the shadows, taller than a man, robed like a pilgrim, its face hidden. He stumbled, nearly dropping the lantern. No one else reacted. The monks walked steadily, their chants rising, and the villagers gazed forward. Only Haru seemed to see. The figure lifted a shadowed hand and pointed down the length of the wall, where the lantern glow barely touched. Its gesture was slow, deliberate, an invitation, or a command. Haru's breath caught. He wanted to follow, but the procession moved onward. The moment passed, and the figure melted back into darkness. His lantern dimmed to its ordinary glow. All night, the image haunted him. After the festival ended and the lanterns were set adrift on the stream, Haru lingered again by the wall. "Who are you?" he whispered desperately. "What do you want of me?" The shadows did not answer. Only the faint drip of water from the eaves and the rustle of wind in bamboo replied. Yet he knew, with a certainty he could not explain, the wall was no longer content with silence. It had shown him a path, and soon he would have to walk it. Chapter 4: The Silent Pilgrim. The days after the Lantern Festival passed in uneasy quiet. Frost began to gather in the mornings, silvering the temple roofs and biting at Haru's fingers as he worked. Yet in his mind, the image of the shadowed figure lingered tall, robed, its hand pointing down the wall into darkness. Each evening, when the monks retired to their quarters, Haru returned to the wall. Lantern in hand, he traced the plaster's length, searching for a sign. Sometimes the shadows lay still, sometimes they quivered faintly as if stirred by breath. On the seventh night, he saw it again. The figure stood where the light of his lantern barely reached, robed in darkness. It made no sound, no movement, save to tilt its head toward him. Haru's chest tightened. "Are you the one who spoke to me?" he whispered. The figure did not answer. Slowly, it raised a hand and placed a finger to where its lips might have been, a gesture of silence. Then it turned, gliding along the wall. Without thinking, Haru followed. His lantern cast trembling light across the stones, the shadows shifting and multiplying with every step. The figure led him to a part of the wall where ivy hung thick and the plaster was cracked with age. There, it stopped. Haru approached cautiously. Beneath the ivy, he saw faint lines carved into the wall, characters worn almost to nothing. He brushed the leaves aside, straining to read. The inscription spoke of vows to guard the threshold, to keep the silence, to bear the burden of shadows. Before he could read further, the wind rose. The lantern flame guttered violently, shadows leaping like startled birds. When Haru looked back, the pilgrim was gone. Only the wall, the ivy, and the fading words remained. That night, he lay awake, the vow echoing in his mind. To guard the threshold, to bear the burden of shadows. What threshold? What burden? He remembered how the villagers feared the wall at dusk, how children avoided its edge, how the monks themselves never lingered after sunset. And now he knew there was something hidden there, a silence so heavy it demanded guardianship. But why him? Why a boy with nothing but a broom in his hands? He dreamed again of the procession of shadows, silent pilgrims moving along the wall, their faces hidden, their steps soundless. And among them, he walked as one of their own, lantern dim but steady. When he awoke, frost rimmed the edges of his blanket. Yet within him burned a strange, undeniable warmth. The wall had chosen him. Chapter 5: The Burden of Shadows. Winter tightened its grip on the valley. The fields lay bare, the streams ran thin beneath sheets of ice, and the monk's breath smoked like incense in the frigid air. Yet the wall of Shirinji Temple remained unchanged, its surface pale by day, darkly alive by dusk. Haru could not resist returning each evening, lantern in hand, to the place where the vow was carved. The ivy now seemed to curl back willingly, as though the wall itself invited him. He traced the faint characters with numb fingers, whispering them until they etched themselves into his heart. To guard the threshold, to keep the silence, to bear the burden of shadows. He did not yet know what the burden was. But he was about to learn. One night, as snow began to fall, Haru stood again before the wall. The flakes caught the lantern's glow, drifting like pale moths. Then the shadows stirred. From their shifting depths emerged the pilgrim figure, taller than before, more defined, its robes flowing though no wind blew. Its face remained veiled, but its presence pressed heavily against Haru's chest. Haru swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" The figure raised its hand and pointed not at the wall, but beyond toward the forest path that wound down to the village. Haru's lantern trembled in his grasp. He saw, faintly in the plaster, shapes forming the silhouettes of villagers, bent low, burdened by unseen weight. Some stumbled, some fell. Their mouths opened, but no sound came. He stepped closer, horrified. Are they suffering? The shadows rippled. 1,000 faint whispers overlapped, like dry leaves in a storm. They forget us, they forget the vow. Haru fell to his knees. His chest ached as if the silence itself were pressing into his lungs. He realized the burden was not only his, it was the sorrow of those who had come before, the unspoken. Prayers of countless lives, carried in silence against the temple wall. "I'm only a boy," he gasped. "I can't bear this alone." The pilgrim loomed above him, silent. Then, slowly, it lowered its shadowed hand and placed it upon Haru's shoulder. Though no weight should have been there, Haru nearly collapsed beneath the heaviness of it. Yet within that crushing silence was also warmth and acknowledgement. Not a command, but a sharing. The whispers faded. The pilgrim dissolved once more into darkness. Haru knelt in the snow, shaking, tears freezing on his cheeks. He understood now the burden was not to be solved, but carried. To stand with the shadows, to remember what others had forgotten. That night, as he stumbled back to his futon, the vow no longer seemed distant words carved on stone. It lived in his bones, in his breath, in every step he took. To guard the threshold, to keep the silence, to bear the burden of shadows. And for the first time, Haru whispered back into the stillness. "I will." Chapter 6 The Village Whispers. The snow deepened, muffling the world in white silence. Paths between the temple and the village grew narrow, carved only by the daily steps of monks and farmers. Smoke curled from the thatched roofs below, and the tolling of the temple bell carried further in the thin air. Yet amidst this winter stillness, whispers began to stir. Haru's behavior had not gone unnoticed. The monks saw the way he lingered at dusk, lantern always in hand, eyes fixed upon the temple wall long after his chores were done. Villagers, too, spoke of glimpsing him there in the snow, unmoving, as though listening to voices no one else could hear. "Strange boy," muttered one farmer, warming his hands by the brazier. "He stares at walls as though they'll answer him. Perhaps the shadows have claimed him," said another, uneasily. "My grandmother told me never to look at them too long." The rumors reached Haru's parents, who journeyed up the mountain one morning, breathless with worry. His mother clutched his hands. "Haru, why do they say such things? That you talk to shadows?" Haru could not answer. How could he explain the vow carved into the plaster, the pilgrim? Who appeared in silence, the crushing weight that was not a curse but a calling? He lowered his eyes. "I'm only doing what I must." His father frowned, calloused hands tightening. "Be careful, boy. The village fears what it does not understand. And fear, once kindled, is hard to extinguish." That evening, Haru returned once more to the wall. The snow reflected his lantern's glow, casting long pale light across the plaster. The whispers rose almost at once, restless, overlapping, like voices pressing against one another. This time, they carried not only sorrow, but urgency. "The vow weakens the silence," phrase the villagers forget. Haru pressed his palm to the cold wall. "What must I do?" he begged. The shadows shifted, forming fleeting silhouettes, villagers carrying bundles, children laughing, monks kneeling in prayer. Each image flickered, blurred, then dissolved, leaving only black smears on the plaster. Behind him, footsteps crunched in the snow. Haru turned sharply, heart racing, but it was Elder Rensho, the oldest monk of Shirinji, leaning on his staff. His eyes, clouded but sharp beneath heavy brows, fixed on Haru. "You hear them, don't you?" the elder said. Haru's breath caught. You know of the voices?" Rensho nodded slowly. "When I was young, I too lingered by this wall. I, too, felt the weight of shadows. But I turned away. The burden was heavy, and I feared what it would make of me. Perhaps I was wrong." The elder's voice was both regretful and resolute. "The vow does not vanish. It passes, from one who denies it to one who accepts. You, Haru, have accepted." The wind rose, carrying a flurry of snow across the wall. For an instant, both Haru and Rensho saw the pilgrim figure standing among the shadows, silent and tall. Then it was gone. The elder bowed his head. "The silence has chosen you, child." Whether the village fears or follows, the burden is yours now." Haru's lantern flickered in the wind, but he held it steady. Though fear trembled in his chest, the weight no longer crushed him, it anchored him. And far below, in the village, whispers began to grow louder. Chapter 7: The Night of Petition. The night was brittle with cold, the moon high and white against a sky stripped bare of clouds. The snow crunched like glass beneath hurried feet as lanterns bobbed along the narrow path from the village to the temple gates. A crowd gathered, men and women, elders and youths, their faces drawn tight with unease. Smoke from their torches curled in the air, carrying with it a restless heat that clashed with the frozen stillness of the mountain night. At their head was the village headman, Genzo, a broad-shouldered man with a furrowed brow and a voice meant for command. He struck the temple gate with the base of his lantern pole. "Open!" he shouted. "We demand counsel." The monks stirred from their quarters. Bells chimed softly in confusion, and the great gate creaked open to reveal Abbot Sagetsu, tall and serene despite the hour. His robe swayed in the frigid wind as he surveyed the crowd. "What troubles you at this hour, neighbors?" the abbot asked, voice even as the falling snow. The villagers erupted at once. "The boy stirs shadows. We've seen him standing for hours, muttering to the wall. Children fear the temple, now they will not come near." And then, quieter but sharper, "What if it is a curse?" Haru, drawn by the clamor, appeared behind the abbot, lantern in hand. His mother's eyes found him in the crowd, wet with worry. But the others pointed, voices rising. "There! The boy himself. Look how the shadows cling to him." Haru's heart pounded. He wanted to flee into the snow, to dissolve into the silence of the wall, but the whispers within him surged instead. "Do not retreat. Stand." The abbot raised his staff, commanding stillness. Slowly, the voices ebbed. He turned to Haru. "If you would speak, child, speak now. The night demands truth." The villagers' eyes bored into him. Haru's hands trembled, but he lifted the lantern high, its light casting long shapes across the temple wall. For an instant, the shadows deepened, stretching, shifting like figures pressing forward from another world. A murmur of fear rippled through the crowd. "They are not curses," Haru said, his voice breaking, then steadying. "They are memories. The voices of those who vowed to guard this place, long before any of us. They call not for harm, but remembrance." The crowd shifted uneasily. Genzo stepped forward, frowning. "And how do we know this is not trickery? That your shadows will not bring misfortune upon us?" Before Haru could answer, Elder Rensho appeared, leaning heavily on his staff. His voice, though frail, carried over the gathered. "I have heard them too," he said. "In my youth, I turned away in fear. But fear does not silence them, it only blinds us. The boy has done what I could not, he listens." The villagers fell into murmurs. Some averted their gaze, uneasy. Others studied Haru with a new, cautious respect. The abbot's gaze softened as he looked upon Haru. A vow once broken seeks one who dares to hold it. This child may yet bind what was loosened. We must not reject him. But Genzo scowled, gripping his lantern pole. And if he fails? If the shadows consume him, and us with him? Who bears that burden then? The question hung heavy, carried on the cold wind. Even the temple bell seemed silent. Haru's hand clenched around his lantern. He stepped forward, past the abbot, past Elder Rensho, until he stood at the threshold between monks and villagers. "I will bear it," he said. "If there is danger, let it fall upon me alone. But do not let fear blind you to what protects us." The snow swirled, and for a moment, all were silent. The villagers stared, torn between suspicion and the faint glimmer of faith. And above them, the shadows along the temple wall stretched long and still, as though listening too. Chapter 8: The Trial of Shadows. The temple agreed to silence the villagers' fears not with words alone, but with a trial. If the boy truly bore the vow of shadows, he must face them. If he faltered, then the abbot promised the monks would intervene and release him from the burden. It was the first night of the waning moon. The villagers gathered outside the temple walls, their lanterns flickering like restless stars. The monks encircled the inner courtyard, chanting sutras to steady the air. Snow clung to the eaves, but no sound fell. The stillness was as though the mountain itself was holding breath. Haru stepped barefoot across the frozen stones, lantern in hand. His robe was thin, his breath visible, but his gaze was steady. The shadows on the wall rippled faintly, though no torch touched them. Abbot Sagetsu raised his staff. "Child, you stand before vow and silence alike. Whatever appears tonight, you must not turn away. Only then shall we know if you are chosen." Haru bowed, then faced the wall. The shadows began to stir. At first, they were no more than smudges, stretching and bending like reeds in a wind unseen. Then they took form: human, animal, spirit. He saw monks kneeling in eternal prayer, villagers carrying burdens of rice, and foxes darting between trees. All were made of shifting blackness, yet their presence pressed upon him like a tide. A voice, not of one but of many, filled the air. "Do you accept us?" Haru's knees trembled. Behind him, he sensed the villagers clutching each other, some whispering prayers. He bowed deeply. "I accept." The shadows surged. The figures leapt from the wall, surrounding him in a whirl. The cold deepened, and his lantern sputtered, its flame shrinking. Whispers clawed at his ears: regrets of the dead, broken vows, unfulfilled promises. Each sought to enter him, to weigh upon his shoulders. He faltered, the world spinning. Too heavy, too many. Then he remembered Elder Rensho's words: fear blinds. Listening freeze. He let the whispers in not as curses, but as voices. He did not resist their sorrow, he breathed it, let it settle like falling snow. And in that moment, the lantern flared bright. The shadows paused, shifting in rhythm with his breath. They no longer pressed to crush him, but circled like attendants, as though testing his resolve. Abbot Sagetsu's voice rose above the chant. "He stands." A murmur rippled through the villagers. Some wept. Others turned away, afraid of what it meant. Finally, the shadows retreated, folding back into the wall. Only one remained, a tall pilgrim, faceless yet solemn, who bowed once to Haru before dissolving into blackness. Silence fell. The abbot lowered his staff. "The trial is met." And though the night was colder than any before, Haru felt a warmth settle within his chest, steady and enduring. Chapter 9: The Lantern Within. After the trial, the temple grounds changed. The villagers no longer whispered of curses, though fear lingered. They came hesitantly, bringing offerings of rice and sake, bowing awkwardly toward the temple wall before turning away. Some muttered thanks to Haru under their breath. Others avoided his eyes, as though fearing to be drawn into his burden. The monks treated him with new respect. They no longer dismissed his nightly vigils as odd. Instead, some joined him at dusk, watching quietly though never hearing what he did. Only Elder Rensho nodded knowingly, as if each whisper Haru received was a continuation of a story he had left unfinished decades ago. Yet Haru felt no pride. The trial had not freed him, it had bound him more tightly. The shadows were now constant, brushing against his awareness even in daylight. They whispered in market laughter, in the rustle of cedar branches, in the crackle of the hearth. They did not torment, but they never ceased. One evening, as the last snow began to soften under the breath of spring, Haru sat alone beneath the plum blossoms by the temple garden. His lantern rested at his side, unlit. "You carry us well," the shadows murmured. "But lanterns dim. What burns when oil runs dry?" The question struck him. For months, his strength had come from the small flame he carried, its light, its warmth, its defiance against the dark. Yet what if it failed? What if storms or time robbed him of it? He closed his eyes. Beneath his ribs, he felt the echo of warmth from the trial. Not the lantern's flame, but something deeper. The quiet fire of acceptance, of listening. When he opened his eyes again, he saw it, faint light glowing not from the lantern, but from within himself, reflecting in the still water of the garden pool. A realization dawned. The lantern was only a mirror. The vow did not rest in oil or flame, it rested in the one who bore it. That night, he returned to the wall without his lantern. The monks whispered in concern, and the villagers who lingered frowned in confusion. But Haru placed his hand against the cold plaster, unafraid. The shadows stirred, testing the darkness. Yet when they pressed close, his heart glowed steady, casting its own light. The figures bowed, their whispers softer now, almost like a lullaby. And for the first time, Haru felt not only their sorrow, but their peace. Chapter 10: The River's Wrath. Spring thaw came late that year. Snow melted from the ridges all at once, rushing down the mountain in torrents that swelled the river beyond its banks. By dusk, the villagers gathered in panic. The river foamed and roared, tearing at the embankments with the fury of a living beast. Fields were drowning, footpaths vanishing, and houses closest to the banks trembled with the surge. Lanterns flickered along the muddy roads as Genzo, the headman, shouted orders. Men carried stones and sandbags, women hauled children and the elderly to higher ground. Yet the waters rose faster than they could act. Haru arrived from the temple, his robe soaked from the rain, his hair clinging to his face. The monks followed, chanting sutras against disaster, but the roar nearly swallowed their voices. The villagers cried out at the sight of him. The boy of shadows. Can he stop this? Haru's chest tightened. He felt the weight of their fear not of him, but of the flood that threatened to erase their lives. He clutched his lantern, then remembered it was no longer the flame he carried, but the vow within. He stepped into the river's spray, cold as steel, and closed his eyes. The shadows surged against him at once, dark figures straining in the current, voices wailing of floods past, of drowned children, of harvests lost. "We know this pain," they whispered. "We have seen it before. Listen." Visions poured into him, monks of old raising earthworks, villagers guiding the river with stone channels, prayers carved into the very wall of the temple. He staggered beneath the flood of memory, but steadied himself. Opening his eyes, he shouted above the roar, "Not fear, remember. The river has been turned before." The villagers stared, uncertain. Genzo barked, "Then tell us how, boy." Haru pointed upstream, to the bend where the river struck hardest. "There is an old channel. Buried under silt. Dig there, guide the water." Monks chant, steady their hands. Everyone else lanterns, light the path. Desperation turned to action. Spades clanged against the earth, men digging where Haru pointed. Women lit lanterns to pierce the storm, and children carried baskets of stone. The monks' voices rose, sutras ringing even above the river's fury. Hours passed in a blur of rain and mud. Haru's strength faltered, yet the shadows urged him on, lending memory to his arms, will to his voice. At last, the earth gave way, the old channel opening like a scar reopened. The river split, roaring down its ancient course. The main current eased, the flood retreating from the village edge. Houses still stood, trembling but unbroken. When the waters calmed, the villagers collapsed in exhaustion. Some wept openly, clutching their families. Genzo stared at Haru, rain dripping from his stern face. At last, he bowed deeply. "You saved us." The words spread through the soaked, shivering crowd. One by one, they bowed as well, not to the abbot, nor the monks, but to the boy who bore the vow of shadows. Chapter 11: The Union of Light and Shadow. In the days after the flood, something shifted. The villagers no longer whispered fearfully of Haru. They brought him food, asked his counsel, and greeted him not with suspicion but with trust. Children followed him up the mountain path, curious about the shadows that no longer frightened them. The temple, too, felt renewed. The monks who once kept a distance now lingered near the wall, listening with open hearts, though they could not hear what Haru did. Even the abbot confessed through you, child, the vow breathes again. We see what we forgot. Yet Haru knew his journey was not complete. The shadows had grown quieter, yes, but not silent. Something deeper remained, a core of sorrow untouched. One night, beneath a sky of clear stars, he returned alone to the wall. He carried no lantern. His steps echoed softly on the frost, and the pine branches whispered in the wind. He placed his hands on the plaster. The shadows welled forth dozens, hundreds, circling him. Yet this time their voices were not chaotic. They gathered into one, a single tone like the deep toll of a temple bell. You have borne us well. But vow is not a division. Light and shadow are not two. Will you join us fully, child? Haru's breath caught. Until now, he had been the vessel, the bearer. But the voice asked more to dissolve the boundary, to become one with the vow itself. Fear trembled in him. Would he cease to be Haru? Would his mother's smile, his father's calloused hands, and the warmth of the village vanish within that union? The shadows pressed close, but not crushing. They waited patiently. Haru closed his eyes. He thought of the floodwaters, of the villagers' bowed heads, of Elder Rensho's weary yet proud gaze. He thought of the lantern flame that once guided him, and of the glow he now carried within. And he understood to join the shadows was not to vanish, but to expand. To carry them as they carried him, endlessly. I will join, he whispered. The air shuddered. The wall itself seemed to breathe. Shadows flowed into him, filling every corner of his being, not heavy, not cold, but endless, like a river joining the sea. His chest burned with light, his veins thrummed with darkness, until the two were indistinguishable. When he opened his eyes, the wall was bare. Smooth plaster. No figures, no whispers. Yet within him, a chorus lingered, gentle, steady, eternal. For the first time, Haru felt wholly himself, and wholly more than himself. Chapter 12. The Village in Harmony. Spring deepened, and with it, the scars of the flood slowly healed. Fields were replanted, houses repaired, and the old channel Haru had revealed was reinforced with stone. Where once fear lingered in whispers, now gratitude hummed softly through the village. The villagers no longer crossed themselves in unease when they saw Haru on the temple path. Instead, they bowed respectfully, sometimes offering rice cakes, sometimes pausing to ask advice. Children would run up to him, bold and laughing, daring one another to ask, "Do the shadows still speak to you, Haru?" He would smile gently. "Not as before. Now, they are part of me." The villagers would nod, not fully understanding, yet comforted all the same. At the temple, monks resumed their daily rituals, but with subtle changes. They left offerings by the wall, not of fear but of remembrance, flowers in spring, incense in summer, rice sheaves in autumn, pine boughs in winter. Elder Rensho would often sit by Haru, leaning on his staff, eyes distant yet at peace. "The vow is whole again," the elder murmured one morning. "What was broken in my time has found its bearer." The abbot added, "Not just bearer, but bridge. Through you, child, vow belongs not to monks alone, but to the whole village." Indeed, the wall was no longer seen as a boundary between light and darkness, but as a meeting ground. Festivals began to include offerings there. Lanterns were floated from the temple down to the river each midsummer, their glow a reminder of what Haru had saved. Yet Haru himself carried a quiet unease. The shadows had joined him, their whispers softened into a steady chorus within. But what did it mean for his future? Could he live as an ordinary villager or monk when he was no longer entirely either? That question lingered like mist in his heart. Chapter 13 Haru's Decision. One evening, as the cicadas sang their first summer chorus, Haru sat with his parents by the hearth of their home in the village. His mother stirred miso soup, his father mended a fishing net. The room smelled of cedar smoke and soy. For a time, it was as if nothing had changed, as if he were simply their son again. Yet when he looked at their faces, lined with both worry and pride, he knew the truth: everything had changed. "Haru," his mother said softly, "will you stay with us now? Or is the temple your home?" He could not answer at once. He loved them. He loved the village. But he felt, too, the constant murmur of the vow within him, guiding him beyond the narrow lanes of his childhood. That night, he walked alone to the stone bridge at the edge of the village, where the river whispered against the banks. The moon's reflection quivered in the current. He closed his eyes, and the shadows within stirred, not as command but as companionship. "What you choose, we choose. We are not chains. We are path." The words were both freeing and daunting. At dawn, Haru climbed the mountain to the temple. The abbot awaited him by the gate, as though expecting this moment. Elder Rensho leaned nearby, silent but attentive. "I must travel," Haru said simply. "The vow is not bound to this wall alone. Its memory lies in villages beyond, in rivers, in forests, in shrines long forgotten. If I carry it, I must walk where it leads." The abbot nodded, serene. "So it is. The vow is living, not stone. To bind it only here would be to wither it again." Elder Rensho placed a trembling hand on Haru's shoulder. "I once fled from what you now embrace. I am glad to see it carried forth." That evening, the villagers gathered when word spread. Many wept, many bowed. Genzo, the headman, spoke gruffly, "You go not as a boy now, but as one of a vow. Remember this village, for it will always be your home." Haru bowed deeply. "I will return. Not as one apart, but as one among you. Always." The next morning, with a staff in hand and a small bundle of rice and dried fish, Haru stepped onto the path beyond the village. The shadows moved with him, quiet, steady, like companions walking at his side. The wall of Shirinji Temple stood silent behind him, yet peaceful, as though relieved. And before him lay endless roads, where vow and memory awaited. Chapter 14 The Path Beyond the Pines. Haru followed the mountain path as the sun rose over the eastern peaks. Snow patches still clung to shaded rocks, and the pines whispered above him, their needles trembling in the morning wind. Each step felt heavier and lighter at once, the weight of the vow within, the freedom of choosing his own path. The villagers had come to see him off at the base of the mountain. They bowed in unison, lanterns in hand, faces solemn yet proud. Even Genzo, who had once doubted him, nodded with respect. "Remember the wall," Genzo called. "And remember the river." Haru smiled faintly. "I will. And I will carry the vow wherever it leads." The shadows moved alongside him, no longer threatening, no longer burdensome. They were companions, silent guides. They traced the contours of the land, flickered among the trees, and whispered faintly of rivers, forests, and villages he had yet to see. The path twisted into the forest. Sunlight slanted through the branches, casting a lattice of light and shadow upon the stones. Each step was a test of balance between the boy he had been and the vow he now bore, between fear and courage, between self and the chorus of voices within him. At a narrow bridge over a clear mountain stream, Haru paused. He looked down into the water and saw not just his reflection, but the faint shimmer of the shadows within him. They moved in harmony, light and dark intertwined, a living dance of memory and presence. He knelt, dipped his hand into the stream, and whispered, "I will remember all who came before, and all who follow. I will carry you, and I will walk forward." The water rippled, sunlight catching the droplets like 1,000 lanterns. The vow pulsed gently within him, steady and sure. With a deep breath, he rose and stepped onto the path beyond the pines. The journey had begun. Chapter 15 The Journey of Light and Shadow. The path stretched endlessly, winding through valleys, over ridges, and along rivers that gleamed like silver in the moonlight. Haru traveled lightly, carrying only what he needed, but the vow he bore filled him with an invisible weight, a responsibility, yes, but also a presence of belonging and purpose. He encountered villages where the shadows had long been forgotten, temples abandoned, rivers untended. In each place, he left a trace, a whispered prayer, a realignment of stones, a quiet guidance that helped the living remember. Slowly, he saw the world change. People's eyes softened, children laughed along paths once feared, elders nodded with understanding. At night, Haru would rest beneath the trees, lantern at his side, listening to the whispers. They told him of ancient vows, of unseen guardians, of the flow of memory and life. He spoke back, sometimes in silence, sometimes aloud, and the shadows moved in response, not commanding, but guiding. Seasons passed. The mountains turned from green to gold, then white, then pink with blossoms. Haru's face matured, yet the spark in his eyes remained youthful, alive. Wherever he walked, the harmony of shadow and light accompanied him. One evening, standing atop a ridge overlooking a quiet valley, Haru felt the vow within him pulse in rhythm with the wind. The shadows flickered, forming shapes of foxes, monks, children, elders, an entire chorus of life, memory, and promise. He lifted his hand, as if to touch the stars, and whispered, "I carry you. Always." And for the first time, he felt truly whole. Not alone, not apart, but part of something greater, a living, breathing harmony between the seen and unseen, the past and the present, the light and the shadow. The moon rose over the valley, soft and luminous, casting silver across the trees, the streams, and the pines. Haru's lantern glowed faintly beside him, a reminder of the flame within that needed no oil, no glass, no wind. It was his own, eternal and steadfast. He stepped forward, into the night, into the unknown, and into the journey that would carry both shadow and light, forever intertwined. Reflections in a Snowy Garden. Prologue. The silent garden. Snow fell softly over the garden of Shizukana Temple, blanketing the ancient stones and bonsai in a hushed white. Lanterns along the winding paths flickered in the evening wind, casting faint, trembling shadows across the snow. The temple bell, silent for most of the day, waited for midnight to toll, yet its presence seemed to resonate even now. A lone figure moved through the garden, leaving footprints in the fresh snow. Haru, a boy of 17, carried a small lantern, its glow mingling with the moonlight reflecting off the icy surfaces. His breath puffed in delicate clouds, and the crisp air carried the faint scent of pine and incense. Haru paused at a small pond, its surface frozen but clear, like polished glass. He gazed into the reflection and saw not only himself but the faint ripples of shadows, old monks who once walked these paths. Pilgrims long gone, and fleeting glimpses of the garden in seasons past. A whisper drifted through the air, soft as falling snow. "Remember." Haru shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of memory pressing against his chest. The garden was more than a place of beauty, it was a repository of vows, of promises carved into stones, of lives intertwined with nature and time. Tonight, he thought, he would understand why he had been drawn here, not merely as a visitor, but as a witness. Perhaps even a participant, in the quiet story the temple had held for centuries. Chapter 1. The First Reflection. Haru stepped along the stone path toward the main hall, his footsteps muffled by the snow. Each step echoed faintly, as if the garden itself were listening. The temple doors were closed, yet he could hear the faint murmur of chanting coming from inside, the monks keeping evening prayer even as the world outside lay still. He knelt at the edge of the frozen pond, letting the lantern illuminate the surface. Tiny snowflakes landed on the ice, melting instantly, leaving small crystalline impressions. In that moment, the reflection seemed almost alive, as though the garden itself were breathing beneath the snow. From the shadows of the pines, a figure emerged, an old monk, robes trailing lightly over the snow. Elder Rensho, his face lined with both age and wisdom, approached without a sound. "You see them, don't you?" the monk said softly. "The reflections. They are not merely ice and moonlight. They are the echoes of lives lived here, vows taken, moments preserved." Haru nodded, unsure if he could speak. I see memories, faces, movements I cannot place. But why me?" Rensho smiled faintly. "Because the garden chooses. Not every visitor notices, and fewer still are called to carry what it offers. You have the heart to listen, and the stillness to witness." The boy's lantern trembled in his hands. He felt both honored and burdened, as if the garden's quiet majesty had placed a weight upon him he could not yet measure. "Tonight," the elder continued, "you will witness the first reflection. It is a truth of the past, a guidance for the present. Watch and learn." The wind rose, sending a swirl of snow across the pond. The ice rippled faintly, and for the first time, the reflection changed, a young girl, laughing beside the pond in summer, scattering petals across the water. The petals floated, unseen by the living world, and then settled in a circle of light around her reflection. Haru whispered, "I've never seen her before." "She is part of the garden," Rensho said. "Part of all who have tended it, loved it, and remembered it. And now, part of you. Each reflection carries a lesson, each whisper a vow. If you listen well, you may find your path within these snowy walls." Haru lowered his lantern, letting the soft glow mingle with the moonlight. The garden seemed to breathe with him, the snow quiet but alive, and the reflections shimmered like fleeting memories pressing gently against the present. Tonight, he realized, he was not merely walking among stones and pines. He was walking among lives, among echoes, among the silent heart of the temple itself. Chapter 2: Whispers Beneath the Pines. The snow had thickened by morning, turning the temple garden into a sea of white. The pines bowed under the weight, their branches forming natural arches that guided Haru's path deeper into the courtyard. Each step left a delicate impression in the powder, as though the garden itself were noting his passage. Elder Rensho followed silently, his presence a steady reminder that the boy was not alone, yet the journey must be personal. "Haru," the elder said softly, "the garden does not speak in words. It speaks in memory, in motion, in light and shadow. You must learn to listen not with your ears, but with your mind and heart." The boy nodded. He had felt it before, faint echoes in the snow, the stir of unseen figures beneath the pines, the soft pulse of life in stones and lanterns. But until now, he had not understood their meaning. They reached a clearing where a small grove of bamboo grew in thick clusters. The snow settled between the stalks, muffling all sound. Yet Haru could hear something soft, almost like sighs, whispers carried in the wind. He knelt beside a stone lantern, its surface etched with characters worn smooth by time. The whispers seemed to converge there. Leaning closer, he glimpsed a shadow, not of a person, but of movement figures walking in slow ritual. Sweeping paths, offering incense, bowing in silent devotion. They are not spirits of harm, Rensho explained. They are memories, repeating the actions that once honored this place. They remind the living of duty, of respect, of balance. And sometimes, they choose one who can perceive them to teach, to guide, to connect. Haru reached out. His fingers brushed the cold stone, and for a heartbeat, the whispers surged into his mind, not loud, but full of emotion: joy, sorrow, love, reverence. It was overwhelming, yet he did not pull away. Instead, he breathed, letting the impressions settle into understanding. When he looked up, the bamboo grove was still, the shadows no longer moving. But within him, the echoes remained a quiet chorus that hummed beneath his ribs, reminding him that memory was not separate from life, and that life carried memory forward. Chapter 3: The First Snow Reflection. Night fell over the temple garden, deeper and darker than Haru had anticipated. The snow had ceased, leaving the world crystalline under the moonlight. Lanterns along the pathways glowed like stars fallen to the earth, and the pond reflected each light as though the sky itself had descended. Haru knelt once again at the pond's edge, waiting. Elder Rensho remained behind him, watching without speaking. This time, the reflection was not of a single figure, but of an entire scene. Monks tending the temple in summer, children playing along the riverbank, cherry blossoms in bloom. The garden seemed alive with a rhythm of seasons passing, of lives entwined across generations. Haru noticed a girl among them, one he had glimpsed in the earlier reflection. She moved gracefully, scattering petals across the water's surface. The petals drifted in intricate patterns, tracing arcs and spirals that mirrored the stone paths and lanterns of the present. "She is the keeper of memory," Rensho whispered. "Not all reflections choose a guide. Some are guardians, observing the flow of life, reminding us of what was and what may yet be." The boy stared, mesmerized. "And she watches me?" Rensho inclined his head. "She watches the world, and all who walk within it. Some of us are chosen to witness, others to act. You, Haru, may be both." Haru felt a stirring in his chest. The snow, the stones, the lanterns, they were not merely part of the garden. They were part of him now, woven into the quiet rhythm of his being. He whispered to the reflection, unsure if words would reach it. "I will remember. I will walk with you." The petals drifted closer, floating in delicate spirals toward him. For an instant, the pond shimmered as if the past and present had merged. Haru felt a surge of warmth, a connection to the generations who had walked these paths, and to the unseen guardian who had chosen to show herself. When he lifted his eyes to the night sky, the moon shone brighter than before, and the snow-laden branches seemed to bow in acknowledgement. The garden had spoken, and Haru had listened. Chapter 4: The Silent Bridge. The snow had softened to a gentle drizzle, dusting the stone bridge that spanned the small stream winding through the temple garden. Haru walked slowly across it, his reflection mirrored in the rippling water below. The bridge had been there for centuries, worn smooth by countless footsteps, monks, villagers, pilgrims, and now him. Elder Rensho followed, his hands tucked into the sleeves of his robe. "This bridge," he said softly, "connects more than banks of water. It links the past to the present, memory to life. Each who crosses leaves a trace, whether seen or unseen." Haru stopped at the center, peering into the water. Shadows of fish and drifting petals mingled with the reflections of trees and sky. Then, faintly, he saw them, echoes of travelers long gone, their forms translucent but distinct. Carrying baskets of offerings or walking with children on their shoulders. "Why show me this?" Haru asked. Rensho smiled faintly. "To remind you that life, like water, flows through many hands. The garden holds their reflections, their lessons. You are here not merely to see, but to understand your place in this flow." Haru knelt, tracing the edge of the bridge with his fingers. For a moment, the snow whispered beneath his touch. And then, the reflections shifted. A young monk stumbled, carrying incense that tipped into the water. Haru reached toward him instinctively, and the scene steadied. "The garden trusts you," Rensho said. "And so must you trust yourself." The boy's chest filled with warmth, not from the lantern, but from a deeper understanding. The past, present, and future were connected, and he had become part of the chain. Chapter 5: Echoes in the Village. Winter's retreat brought subtle changes to the village below the temple. Snow melted into streams, mud softened the roads, and villagers resumed their daily tasks. Yet an air of quiet anticipation lingered, as if the temple and garden had whispered to them while they slept. Haru descended the mountain path, lantern in hand, careful with each step. Children peered through frosted windows, catching glimpses of him and the light that trailed behind. Some whispered excitedly, others crossed themselves in respect. He arrived at the river bank where villagers had gathered to repair their boats and wash clothes. Elder Rensho followed at a distance, silent as the wind. "Good evening, Haru," said Genzo, the headman, his hands calloused from labor but steady. "The river is generous today, but it will test us. Can we count on your guidance?" Haru's lantern glowed warmly. "I will help. But we must listen to the river, the land, and to the memories it carries." Together, they worked. Haru guided them to buried stones that had once marked safe channels, revealing paths hidden by silt and snow. Children carried small baskets of rocks, women filled sandbags, and men reinforced embankments. With every action, the village seemed to breathe in rhythm with the garden above. That evening, as the work concluded, Haru knelt by the stream, watching the reflections ripple in the last light. Faces of villagers, monks, and unseen guardians merged in the water. He understood, finally, that the vow of the garden was not his alone. It belonged to the land, the people, and every life that had touched this place. And as the snow began to fall lightly once more, he whispered a quiet promise: "I will remember. I will walk with you. Always." Chapter 6: The Garden's Hidden Chamber. Days passed, and Haru felt drawn to a part of the garden he had yet to explore. A narrow path, overgrown with bamboo and cedars, led him to a small, hidden chamber behind a moss-covered stone wall. The door, carved with intricate patterns, seemed to pulse faintly in the cold air. Elder Rensho followed silently. Few find this place without the garden's guidance. It holds the oldest memories, the deepest reflections. What you see here will challenge your understanding. Haru stepped inside. The chamber was small, illuminated only by a slit in the roof, through which snowflakes drifted like silver feathers. On the stone floor were inscriptions, some faded, others glowing faintly, telling stories of monks, villagers, and the unseen guardians who had tended this sacred place for centuries. A whisper filled the room, soft yet persistent. "Do you understand why you are here?" Haru's breath caught. Shadows began to coalesce along the walls, figures of those who had once walked the temple paths, now more distinct than before. They bowed, approached, and circled him, as if measuring his courage. I think I must listen," Haru whispered. The shadows responded with a gentle wind, carrying faint scents of pine, incense, and snow. Visions appeared in the air: the garden in spring bloom, the river after winter thaw, villagers bowing in gratitude. Each image was a lesson, each whisper a vow carried forward. Haru understood then that the garden was not merely a place, it was a living memory, a keeper of continuity. And he, chosen by its silence and reflection, was now a participant, a guardian, and a bridge between past and future. Chapter 7: The Winter Festival. As winter deepened, the village prepared for the annual festival to honor the temple and the sacred garden. Lanterns were strung along the paths, pine boughs adorned the doors, and small offerings of rice and sake were placed at shrines. Snow fell gently, covering the village in a soft white blanket, reflecting the glow of the lanterns like stars on the ground. Haru descended from the temple, carrying a lantern, his robe dusted with snow. Children ran to greet him, laughing, and elders nodded respectfully. Even Genzo approached with a quiet smile. "The festival is brighter this year," Genzo said. "It is as if the garden itself has blessed us." Haru nodded. "It is not just the garden. It is the people who honor it, and the memories we carry together." The festival began at dusk. Villagers circled the central square, singing songs and offering prayers. Lanterns were floated into the river, drifting like tiny stars across the water. Haru stood at the edge, watching the reflections mingle with the snow and moonlight. In the quiet moments, he felt the shadows within him stir not as presences to fear, but as companions, echoing the rhythms of the festival. He understood now that his path was one of service, remembrance, and harmony. The elders of the temple nodded to him. Elder Rensho spoke softly, "You are ready. The garden and village have chosen you as their witness and guide. Walk carefully, Haru, and carry the reflections well." Haru's heart swelled with a quiet determination. He had seen the reflections, heard the whispers, and felt the weight and warmth of memory. From this night onward, he would walk the path of light and shadow, of memory and living, carrying both the village and the garden within him. Chapter 8: The Winter's Trial. A fierce storm swept down from the mountains, bringing snow and ice that blanketed the village and temple. The river, swollen from melting snow, threatened to overflow, and the stone paths in the garden became slick and treacherous. Haru moved quickly, lantern in hand, guiding villagers to reinforce embankments and secure homes. Elder Rensho's chants echoed in the temple, mingling with the wind, lending calm and strength. The shadows within Haru stirred, more active than ever. Figures from the garden's past appeared at the edge of his vision: monks, villagers, and guardians long gone. Their whispers filled the storm with guidance and caution. "Lead them. Protect them. Do not falter." Haru understood. This was the garden's ultimate test, a challenge of memory, courage, and harmony. He coordinated the villagers, directing them to shore up weakened river banks, and even children helped by carrying small stones or lanterns to light the paths. Hours passed in a blur of snow and effort. Haru's lantern flickered, but his resolve did not waver. The shadows moved alongside him, not as fearsome presences, but as guides, teaching him to trust both his own instincts and the wisdom of the past. By dawn, the storm abated. The village stood, battered but intact. Haru's lantern glowed steadily in the early light, its reflection shimmering in the still waters of the river and pond. The trial had passed, and the garden's whispering had grown quieter. Content. Chapter 9: The Awakening. After the storm, Haru returned to the pond in the temple garden. The snow had settled in delicate layers, and the moon reflected perfectly on the smooth surface. For the first time, he did not kneel immediately. Instead, he stood still, letting the silence envelop him. The shadows within him emerged fully, not chaotic, not fragmented, but harmonized. Figures of past monks, villagers, and unseen guardians appeared around him, their movements fluid and synchronized. "You have seen the storm," they whispered. "You have guided life through peril. Are you ready to become the keeper of reflections?" Haru's heart pounded. He felt fear, yes, but also an overwhelming sense of clarity. "I am ready," he whispered. The water rippled. The snowflakes suspended in the moonlight shimmered like falling stars. The garden itself seemed to breathe, each stone and tree vibrating gently as if acknowledging his acceptance. A single figure appeared in the reflection of the pond, the girl from earlier, the guardian of memory. She bowed, then extended her hand toward him. Haru reached forward, and the shadows within him surged into harmony with the garden's echo. At that moment, he felt the full weight and warmth of the vow, the continuity of life, memory, and duty flowing through him. Light and shadow, past and present, human and guardian all intertwined. When he opened his eyes, the pond was still, the garden silent, but the warmth remained within him. He had awakened fully, not as a boy with a lantern, but as the chosen witness and guide of the garden and the village. Chapter 10 Harmony Restored. Spring began to awaken the village, melting the last of the winter snow. The garden, still dusted with lingering frost, glimmered in the soft morning light. Haru walked among the stone paths and lanterns, observing the subtle life returning to the temple and the village below. Villagers moved with renewed confidence. Children played by the river, elders tended small gardens, and fishermen prepared their boats for the season. The river flowed gently, no longer threatening, as if acknowledging the care taken during the storm. Haru met with Elder Rensho in the temple hall. "The balance has returned," Rensho said, eyes thoughtful. "The garden, the village, and now you all harmonize once more. But remember, balance is not static. It must be tended, as you have learned." Haru nodded. "I understand. The garden and the village are part of one flow. Each supports the other, and both reflect the care of those who walk their paths." Rensho smiled. "Well said. You have become both witness and guide. Yet your journey does not end here. There are more gardens, more villages, more reflections that require tending. Are you ready for that responsibility?" Haru paused, gazing out through the open temple doors. The wind carried the scent of pine and blooming cherry, the laughter of children, and the murmur of elders mingling in a gentle chorus. He could feel the shadows within him, calm and aligned, flowing like a river through his being. "I am ready," he said finally, voice steady. "I will walk where the reflections lead me." Chapter 11 The journey begins. On the morning of his departure, the village gathered at the base of the temple. Lanterns were lit along the paths, their warm glow reflecting in the puddles of melting snow. Children clung to their parents, elders leaned on canes or staffs, and even Genzo, the headman, had tears in his eyes. Haru carried a small bundle of essentials and a lantern. Elder Rensho and the temple monks stood at the gate, offering silent blessings. The shadows within Haru stirred gently, forming fleeting shapes of monks, villagers, and guardians, as if acknowledging his readiness. "You walk not alone," Rensho said softly. "The garden, the river, the memories they travel with you." Haru bowed deeply. "I will honor them, always." He stepped onto the path beyond the temple, the snow crunching softly beneath his feet. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and incense, and the first birds of spring sang from the distant hills. Each step felt purposeful, each breath connected to the rhythm of life surrounding him. As he descended toward the valley, he glanced back. The temple and garden glimmered in the morning light, silent but alive. The shadows within him flickered in harmony with the lanterns, a living reminder of the balance he had helped restore. Before him lay the unknown, roads that twisted into forests, mountains, and distant villages. The reflections of the past and the whispers of memory would guide him, steady and gentle, as he carried the garden's bough forward. And so, with the first light of day illuminating his path, Haru began his journey, forever a guardian, forever a witness, walking between shadow and light, memory and life, carrying the harmony of the snowy garden within him. Chapter 12: The Path Through the Pines. The mountain path stretched before Haru, winding through dense pines dusted with snow. Each branch shimmered in the early morning light, needles sparkling like frost-kissed emeralds. He walked steadily, lantern in hand, shadows moving gently at his side. The village had receded below, yet their presence lingered in every whisper of wind and ripple of the streams. The garden's echoes accompanied him, merging with the sounds of the forest rustling branches, the soft call of distant birds, the crunch of snow underfoot. A sense of both anticipation and serenity filled him. The shadows within, once fragments of memory and fear, now felt like companions. They guided his steps without command, like the gentle current of a river shaping its own path. Ahead, the path narrowed over a small stone bridge spanning a stream. Haru paused, looking down at the water. Moonlight reflected on its surface, mingling with the last traces of snow. In that reflection, he saw not only himself, but the garden, the village, and the countless lives intertwined with both. He whispered to the reflection, "I carry you. And I will walk with you, always." The water rippled, responding in quiet approval. Haru stepped forward, the shadows at his side flickering in harmony, and the journey beyond the known began. Chapter 13: Reflections of Light and Shadow. Days turned into weeks as Haru traversed valleys, forests, and mountain passes. He visited villages where streams ran untended, temples abandoned, and paths lost to memory. In each place, he left small acts of guidance, realigning stones, tending gardens, offering prayers, and teaching those willing to listen. At night, he would rest beneath trees, lantern beside him, listening to the whispers of the shadows. They spoke not in commands, but in reminders of life's impermanence, of the interconnection between past and present, of the delicate balance between shadow and light. Over time, the villagers and travelers he aided began to speak of a boy with a lantern, who moved silently, yet left paths clearer, rivers calmer, and hearts steadier. Some claimed they saw shadows moving around him, but always in harmony, never threatening. One evening, Haru climbed a ridge overlooking a quiet valley. The moon rose high, casting silver over forests, rivers, and distant villages. He paused, feeling the shadows stir, forming fleeting shapes of monks. villagers and unseen guardians all reflecting his journey, his choices, and the balance he maintained. He lifted his hand toward the moon, whispering, "I carry you. I carry the garden, the village, and all who walked before. And I will walk forward, carrying the vow." A gentle wind swept through the valley, scattering leaves, petals, and snowflakes together. The light of the moon glimmered across the landscape, as if the world itself acknowledged his vow. In that moment, Haru understood fully the garden, the village, and the shadows were not separate. They were a living harmony, flowing through memory, life, and action. And he, chosen by their trust, would walk forever between shadow and light, memory and life, carrying the reflections wherever he journeyed. The Pine Grove's Gentle Song. Prologue. The Whispering Pines. In the quiet valley beneath the distant mountains, the pine grove stood as it had for centuries. Each tree was tall and straight, needles glistening in the morning dew, trunks cloaked in moss. The air carried the scent of earth, pine resin, and the faint trace of incense from the nearby temple. Haru, a boy of 17, walked among the trees, his steps careful and deliberate. The grove seemed alive, not with animals or wind, but with a gentle hum, a song that resonated beneath the soles of his feet, threading through his thoughts and heart. He paused beside a stone lantern, worn smooth by time. Its light had long since faded, but he imagined the faint glow it once cast across the path. The grove seemed to bend toward him, listening. "Listen," the wind seemed to say. "Listen to the song beneath the pines. It carries memory, lesson, and life." Haru closed his eyes. The gentle song rose and fell with the sway of branches. In it, he thought he heard faint laughter, the rustle of robes, whispers of vows carried from generations past. The song was not loud, but it filled every corner of the grove, and slowly, he understood that he was no longer merely a visitor. Tonight, the grove would reveal its first reflection, and Haru would take the first step toward understanding the bond between memory, nature, and duty. Chapter 1. The First Echo. The sun had set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the pine grove. Lanterns were lit along the temple's stone paths, their soft glow mingling with the silver light of the rising moon. Haru walked slowly, each step creating a delicate imprint in the pine needles covering the ground. Elder Rensho emerged from the shadows, robes brushing the earth silently. "You have come," he said softly. "The grove has chosen you to hear its song, to witness its echoes." Haru bowed. I am ready." Rensho nodded and gestured to a clearing where a small, frozen pond lay beneath a canopy of pines. "Look into the water," he instructed. "Do not merely see yourself. See what the grove wishes to show." Haru knelt at the edge, lantern in hand. The pond reflected the night sky, the surrounding trees, and a faint shimmer that was not his own. Slowly, shapes formed on the surface, monks tending the temple long ago. Children playing beneath the pines, shadows of villagers carrying offerings across the stone paths. They are the echoes of life, Rensho said, voice barely above the whispering wind. Each has passed through this grove, leaving part of themselves behind. The song you hear is their memory, their presence, their lesson. Haru felt a shiver. One figure moved closer, a young girl scattering pine needles across the frozen pond, forming patterns that traced the stones and lanterns of the temple. Her movements were delicate, rhythmic, almost as if she were conducting the song itself. She is part of the grove, Haru whispered. Yes, Rensho said. And now, part of your path. Each reflection carries a message, each echo a responsibility. You must learn to walk in harmony with them. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the faint scent of snow and moss. Haru closed his eyes, listening to the gentle song, and for the first time, felt the weight and warmth of memory, nature, and duty interwoven within him. Tonight, he realized, he was no longer merely a boy walking through a grove of trees. He was a participant in a living harmony, a witness to the song of generations, and the first step of his journey had begun. Chapter 2: The Murmuring Grove. The moonlight filtered through the pine needles, casting long, trembling shadows on the forest floor. Haru walked slowly, listening to the soft creaking of branches and the faint whisper of the wind. Each sound seemed amplified, each rustle carrying a memory from centuries past. Elder Rensho followed at a measured distance, silent as the grove itself. The trees remember, he said softly. They have seen generations walk these paths, monks, villagers, travelers. Each carries their own reflection, and each leaves a trace behind. Haru knelt beside a gnarled pine, its trunk twisted and ancient. Faint carvings were etched into the bark, characters worn by rain, wind, and snow. He ran his fingers over them, feeling the faint vibration of life that lingered in the grove. "Do you feel it?" Rensho asked. Haru nodded. "It's like the grove is speaking. Not words, but feelings, memories. Echoes." "Yes," said Rensho. "And now, it speaks to you. Listen closely, and it may teach you what is needed to walk the path ahead." As Haru closed his eyes, the whispers grew stronger. Forming images in his mind: monks carrying incense across the temple grounds, children laughing beneath the pines, villagers tending gardens and streams. Each scene shimmered, not as a memory of the past alone, but as a living presence intertwined with the present moment. Chapter 3: Reflections in the Pond. Deeper into the grove, a small pond lay hidden among the trees. Its surface was still, smooth as polished stone, reflecting the night sky and the shadows of the surrounding pines. Haru knelt at the edge, holding his lantern above the water. The first reflection appeared: a young monk, bowing before an altar long gone, offering incense with precise, reverent movements. Next, a child appeared, scattering pine needles in delicate arcs across the water. Haru felt the gentle pull of memory, as if the pond itself were a mirror not only of the past, but of the living essence of those who had walked there. "She watches," Rensho whispered. "The guardian of the grove, of memory. Not all reflections choose to reveal themselves, but when they do, they guide those who can perceive them." Haru held his breath as the girl's figure moved closer, petals and pine needles spiraling around her like a delicate dance. He understood, in a sudden clarity, that the grove's song was not simply sound or memory, it was harmony, a melody of life itself, preserved through generations and now entrusted to him. "I will listen," Haru whispered. "I will walk with the song." The wind stirred the pine needles, and the grove seemed to sigh in approval. Haru's journey, he realized, had truly begun not as a visitor, but as a witness, a guardian, and a participant in the enduring harmony of the pine grove. Chapter 4: The Stone Bridge's Song. The first light of dawn touched the village and the temple above, turning the stone paths into rivers of gold and silver. Haru made his way to the small bridge that arched over the gentle stream running through the temple garden. Snow had melted in places, leaving soft puddles that reflected the awakening sky. Elder Rensho followed at a respectful distance. "This bridge," he said softly, "connects more than banks of water. It links past and present, memory and life. Each who crosses leaves a mark, whether seen or unseen." Haru knelt at the edge of the bridge, peering into the water. In its surface shimmered not only his own reflection, but faint echoes of those who had passed before, monks carrying incense, children laughing, villagers offering prayers. "Why show me this?" Haru whispered. "To teach you that life flows through many hands," Rensho replied. "And that you, too, are now a part of the current." Haru extended his hand over the water. The ripples spread, and the shadows of the past seemed to shift, forming a gentle embrace around him. The song of the stone bridge, quiet yet eternal, sang within his heart. Chapter 5: The Village's Quiet Vigil. Winter was slowly giving way to early spring, yet the chill lingered in the valley. Haru descended the temple steps to visit the village, lantern in hand. Children peeked from their homes, elders nodded respectfully, and the river gurgled softly, as if aware of his presence. The villagers had gathered to mend the small bridges and paths disrupted by winter's snow. Haru guided them carefully, pointing out stones and embankments that needed reinforcement. With each movement, he felt the echoes of the garden accompany him, lending guidance, lending patience. "The village thrives when we listen," Haru said softly to those around him, to the river, to the land, and to the memories it carries. By dusk, the work was done. Lanterns reflected in the river, children played among the stones, and elders murmured blessings. Haru knelt at the edge of the water, gazing at the reflections of the village, garden, and sky. He felt the weight of responsibility settle in his chest, tempered by warmth and clarity the garden's song. the village's trust, and the memory of all who had walked these paths now flowed together. Chapter 6: The Grove's Hidden Chamber. Deep within the pine grove, a narrow path wound between ancient trees, leading Haru to a moss-covered stone wall. There, hidden among twisting vines, was a small door carved with delicate symbols. It seemed to pulse faintly, as if recognizing his approach. Elder Rensho followed, his steps careful. Few find this place without the grove's guidance. Inside lie the oldest memories, the deepest reflections. What you see here will test your understanding and your heart. Haru pushed the door open. Inside was a small chamber, illuminated only by a shaft of moonlight falling through a crack in the roof. Stone inscriptions covered the floor and walls, some faded, others glowing faintly. They told stories of monks, villagers, and guardians who had long tended the grove. Whispers filled the room, soft and persistent. "Do you understand why you are here?" Shadows began to move along the walls, figures of those who had walked the temple paths centuries before. They circled him, bowing, testing his courage. I will listen," Haru whispered. The shadows swirled in response, and visions appeared in the air: spring blossoms, river floods, villagers bowing in reverence. Each scene carried a lesson, each whisper a vow carried forward. Haru understood then the grove was not merely a place, it was alive, and he had become a participant, a guardian, a bridge between past and future. Chapter 7: The Festival of Lanterns. Winter had faded into early spring, and the village prepared for the festival honoring the temple and the pine grove. Lanterns were strung along paths, pine boughs adorned the doors, and offerings of rice and sake were placed at shrines. Haru descended from the temple with a lantern in hand, snow still clinging to his robes. Children ran to greet him, laughing, and elders nodded in respect. Even Genzo, the headman, wore a quiet smile. "The festival is brighter this year," Genzo said. "It is as if the grove itself has blessed us." Haru nodded. "It is not just the grove. It is the people who honor it, and the memories we carry together." As dusk fell, villagers circled the central square, singing and offering prayers. Lanterns were floated on the river, drifting like stars across the water. Haru knelt by the edge, watching reflections mingle with the snow and moonlight. The shadows within him stirred, not threatening, but companions, echoing the rhythms of the festival. He understood now that his path was one of service, remembrance, and harmony. Elder Rensho's voice reached him softly: "You are ready. The grove and village have chosen you as their witness and guide. Walk carefully, Haru, and carry the reflections well." Haru felt a quiet determination. He had heard the song of the grove, witnessed the reflections of life, and accepted his place within the harmony of memory and living. Chapter 8: The Winter Trial. A fierce storm swept down from the mountains, blanketing the village and temple in snow. The river, swollen from melted snow, threatened to overflow, and the stone paths in the garden became slick and treacherous. Haru moved swiftly, lantern in hand, guiding villagers to reinforce embankments and secure homes. Elder Rensho's chants echoed through the temple, blending with the wind, lending calm and strength. The shadows within Haru stirred. Figures from the grove's past appeared at the edges of his vision: monks, villagers, and unseen guardians. Their whispers filled the storm with guidance. Lead them. Protect them. Do not falter. Haru coordinated the villagers, directing them to shore up riverbanks. Even children helped by carrying small stones or lanterns to light the paths. The grove's echoes flowed through him, lending wisdom and patience. Hours passed. Snow and wind battered them, but by dawn, the village stood intact. Haru's lantern glowed steadily, reflecting in the river and pond. The storm had tested his courage, patience, and understanding, but he had endured, and the grove's song was quieter now, content. Chapter 9: Awakening in the Grove. After the storm, Haru returned to the hidden pond in the grove. Snow lay in delicate layers, and the moon reflected perfectly on the water. For the first time, he did not kneel immediately. He stood, letting silence and the grove's breath envelop him. The shadows within emerged fully, not chaotic or fragmented, but harmonized. Figures of past monks, villagers, and guardians appeared around him, moving fluidly. "You have seen the trial," they whispered. "You have guided life through peril. Are you ready to become the keeper of reflections?" Haru's heart pounded. Fear lingered, but clarity and calm filled him. "I am ready," he whispered. The pond rippled. Snowflakes suspended in the moonlight shimmered like falling stars. The grove itself seemed to breathe, each tree and stone vibrating gently. A single figure appeared in the reflection: the girl who had guided him before. She bowed, then extended her hand. Haru reached forward, and the shadows within surged into harmony with the grove's echoes. At that moment, he felt the full weight and warmth of the vow, the continuity of life, memory, and duty flowing through him. Light and shadow, past and present, human and guardian, all intertwined. When he opened his eyes, the pond was still, the grove silent, but the warmth remained within him. He had awakened fully, not merely as a boy, but as a witness and guide, carrying the harmony of the grove wherever he walked. Chapter 10: Harmony Restored. Spring awakened the village, melting the last of winter's snow. The garden, still glimmering with frost in shaded corners, breathed life back into the temple. Haru walked along stone paths, observing streams gurgle gently, children play, and elders tending gardens. Elder Rensho approached quietly. "Balance has returned," he said. "The garden, the village, and now you all harmonize once more. But balance is never static, it must be tended, as you have learned." Haru nodded. The garden and village are one flow. Each supports the other, and both reflect the care of those who walk their paths. Rensho smiled. "You are both witness and guide. Yet your journey does not end here. Many paths await gardens and villages that need tending. Are you ready?" Haru gazed at the valley below, feeling the wind carry the scent of pine, cherry, and incense. The shadows within him moved calmly, flowing like a river. "I am ready," he said. Chapter 11. The journey begins. On the morning of his departure, the village gathered at the temple gate. Lanterns glowed warmly, reflecting in puddles from the last thaw. Children clutched parents' hands, elders bowed, and Genzo, the headman, nodded with quiet pride. Haru carried a lantern and a small bundle. Rensho and the monks offered silent blessings. The shadows stirred, forming fleeting shapes of villagers, monks, and guardians, acknowledging his readiness. "You walk not alone," Rensho said softly. "The garden, the river, the memories they travel with you." Haru bowed deeply. "I will honor them, always." He stepped onto the path beyond the temple. Snow crunched softly underfoot, and the wind carried whispers of pine and moss. Every step felt purposeful, every breath connected to the rhythm of life. Before him lay unknown valleys, forests, and distant villages. Reflections and memories would guide him, steady and gentle. The temple and grove glimmered behind him, silent but alive. And so, Haru began his journey forever a guardian, forever a witness, walking between shadow and light, memory and life, carrying the harmony of the garden and village within him. Chapter 12. The Path Through the Pines. The mountain path stretched before Haru, winding through dense pines dusted with lingering snow. Each branch shimmered in the morning light, needles sparkling like frost-kissed emeralds. He walked steadily, lantern in hand, shadows moving gently at his side. The village below had faded, but its presence lingered in every rustle of branches and ripple of streams. The grove's echoes accompanied him, merging with the sounds of the forest, rustling needles, the soft call of distant birds, and the steady crunch of snow beneath his feet. A small stone bridge arched over a stream. Haru paused, looking down at the water. Moonlight reflected on its surface, mingling with the last traces of snow. In the reflection, he saw not only himself but the village, the temple, and all the lives intertwined with them. He whispered to the reflection, "I carry you. And I will walk with you, always." The water rippled. The shadows at his side flickered in harmony, and the journey into the wider world began. Chapter 13. Reflections of Light and Shadow. Days turned into weeks as Haru traversed valleys, forests, and mountain passes. He visited villages where streams ran untended, temples abandoned, and paths lost to memory. In each place, he left small acts of care, realigning stones, tending gardens, offering prayers, and teaching those willing to listen. At night, beneath a canopy of pines, he rested with his lantern. The shadows spoke not in commands, but in gentle reminders of impermanence, interconnection, and the delicate balance between shadow and light. Word spread among villagers and travelers of a boy with a lantern who moved silently, yet left paths clearer, rivers calmer, and hearts steadier. Some claimed they saw shadows move with him, always in harmony, never threatening. One evening, atop a ridge overlooking a quiet valley, Haru paused. The moon rose high, casting silver across forests, rivers, and distant villages. The shadows formed shapes of monks, villagers, and unseen guardians, all reflecting his journey and choices. He lifted his hand toward the moon. "I carry you. I carry the garden, the village, and all who walked before. And I will walk forward, carrying the vow." A gentle wind swept through the valley, scattering leaves, petals, and snowflakes together. The moonlight shimmered across the landscape, acknowledging his vow. In that moment, Haru understood fully the garden, the village, and the shadows were not separate. They were a living harmony, flowing through memory, life, and action. He, chosen by their trust, would walk forever between shadow and light, memory and life, carrying the reflections wherever he journeyed. Twilight beneath the paper lanterns. Prologue. The lanterns glow. In the quiet valley nestled between rolling hills and bamboo groves, the village prepared for the evening festival. Paper lanterns, painted with delicate cherry blossoms and streams, were hung along narrow paths, their soft light flickering in the gentle twilight breeze. The scent of incense and fresh pine mingled with the air, creating a serene atmosphere that seemed suspended between night and day. Haru, a boy of 17, walked slowly through the village. Lantern in hand, he traced the soft glow across the river, the stone bridges, and the quiet garden walls. He had come to understand the festival was more than a celebration. It was a ritual, a bridge between memory, reflection, and life itself. The lanterns swayed gently, whispering stories of the past, monks crossing temple grounds, villagers offering prayers, children playing beneath the trees. Their faint light seemed to hum in harmony with the wind. "Listen," the breeze seemed to say. "Listen to the stories the lanterns carry. They are memories, they are guides, they are life." Haru closed his eyes, allowing the soft light and murmur of the festival to fill his senses. In that moment, he felt the weight of history, the warmth of human connection, and the gentle pull of duty intertwining within him. Tonight, the lanterns would illuminate not only the paths of the village but also the hidden reflections of his heart. Chapter 1. The First Illumination. As twilight deepened, the village streets glimmered under the soft light of countless lanterns. Haru moved along the stone path, careful not to disturb the delicate glow reflected in puddles of melted dew. Elder Rensho appeared silently behind him, robes brushing the ground. "The lanterns are more than light," he said softly. "They are vessels of memory, reflection, and guidance. Each one carries the essence of life past and present intertwined." Haru bowed. "I understand, Master." Rensho gestured toward a small bridge over the river. "Look closely. Do not merely see your reflection. See what the lanterns wish to show." Haru knelt at the water's edge, holding his lantern high. The river mirrored not only the glow of lanterns but also faint shapes that shifted with the water, monks offering prayers long ago. Children scattering petals, villagers crossing bridges to pay respect. Each movement was delicate, rhythmic, and filled with purpose. "Why show me this?" Haru whispered. "To teach you," Rensho replied, "that life flows through many hands, and that memory and duty are threads woven into every action. You are part of this current now." The wind rustled through the bamboo and pine, carrying a melody of whispers. Haru felt a shiver, a recognition of the presence of the unseen a girl. The guardian of reflections, moving silently among the lanterns, guiding their glow with subtle gestures. "She is part of the light," Haru murmured. "Yes," said Rensho. "And she will guide you as the lanterns illuminate the path. Walk carefully, observe closely, and learn the song they carry." The boy closed his eyes, letting the lanterns glow and the whispers of the wind fill his heart. The festival lights shimmered like stars brought down to earth, casting both shadows and reflections across the village and the river. In that glow, Haru felt the first stirrings of understanding the journey through memory, life, and reflection had begun. Chapter 2: Shadows Among the Lanterns. The festival continued into the deepening twilight. Lanterns swayed gently along the paths, casting warm light on stone bridges and moss-covered walls. Haru walked slowly, lantern in hand, feeling the vibrations of the grove and village beneath his feet. Elder Rensho followed silently. "Every lantern carries a story," he said softly. "Monks who tended the temple, villagers who offered prayers, children who played under these pines all leave echoes. You must learn to listen." Haru nodded, gazing at the river's reflection. Suddenly, he noticed a flicker shadows that moved independently of the lantern light. One shape, small and delicate, moved gracefully between the glowing lanterns. "Do you see her?" Rensho whispered. "She is the guardian of reflections, guiding those who can perceive her." Haru's heart quickened. The figure paused, scattering petals that danced across the lantern-lit paths. He realized the shadows were not threats, they were companions, offering guidance through rhythm and movement. "Her presence, it's like the grove itself," Haru murmured. "Yes," said Rensho. "She and the lanterns are intertwined. To understand the song of life, you must learn to walk with them, to move between shadow and light." The wind carried whispers, soft yet persistent. Haru felt a deep resonance within himself, the first true connection to the hidden life of the village, temple, and grove. Chapter 3: The Garden Beneath the Glow. Drawn by the guardian, Haru approached the temple garden. Lanterns lined the stone paths, their glow reflected in small pools and the river's gentle bends. Snow dusted the pine branches, and petals from early blossoms floated in the air. The guardian moved to the edge of a small pond, bowing slightly. Haru knelt nearby, lantern held high. The pond's surface shimmered, showing not only his reflection but the faint echoes of those who had walked the garden long ago. Monks offering incense, children scattering petals, villagers crossing stone bridges with careful steps. The garden holds memory, Rensho's voice echoed softly. "It preserves the past and guides the present. You must learn to read it, to respect it, and to carry its song forward." Haru gazed into the pond, seeing the past and present interwoven. He understood that his role was not merely to walk through the village, but to act as a bridge between generations, between shadow and light, between memory and life. "I will listen," Haru whispered. "I will honor the garden, the village, and the lantern's song." The guardian's shadow flickered in acknowledgement. Lanterns above swayed gently, casting their soft, eternal glow across stone paths, water, and pine. Haru felt the stirrings of responsibility and understanding settle deep within him, a quiet resolve strengthened by the harmony around him. Chapter 4: The Hidden Path of Light. The village lay quiet as twilight deepened, the paper lanterns casting a warm glow over winding stone paths and moss-covered walls. Haru followed the guardian's shadow deeper into the temple grounds, discovering a narrow path hidden between pines and bamboo. Elder Rensho's voice echoed softly. "Few notice this path. It carries the accumulated care of generations, monks, villagers, and guardians alike. Walk carefully. Each step is a thread in the song of the grove." Haru stepped forward, lantern held high. The shadows swirled lightly around him, tracing the curves of the path and reflecting the soft glow of the lanterns. The air was alive with whispers, echoes of prayers, laughter, and footsteps long past. At the end of the path lay a small clearing, illuminated by a single lantern hanging from a pine branch. Beneath it, a stone basin reflected the sky, the lantern, and the shadows moving across the grove. Haru knelt, letting the reflections fill his vision. "Each reflection," Rensho whispered, "teaches a lesson. Patience, humility, care, and attentiveness. You must learn to carry them, to harmonize them with the life around you." Haru inhaled deeply. The guardian's shadow moved beside him, and for the first time, he felt completely at one with the grove. The lanterns, and the gentle song that flowed through the air. Chapter 5: The Festival's Quiet Song. The festival reached its peak as villagers gathered around the central square. Lanterns floated along the river, their reflections shimmering like stars across the water. The aroma of incense and roasted rice mingled with the scent of pine and blossoms. Haru guided the villagers in placing lanterns carefully, showing them how to balance light and shadow. Ensuring the reflections in the river and ponds harmonized with the surroundings. Children followed, laughing and imitating his movements, while elders watched with gentle pride. "The festival is a living song," Haru said softly. "Each lantern, each shadow, each reflection carries the memory of those who walked before us. We honor them when we walk carefully and with respect." As night deepened, the river became a ribbon of glowing lights. Haru knelt by the water, watching reflections of lanterns, shadows, and the guardian. The grove seemed to breathe with him, each rustle of pine and bamboo adding notes to the quiet melody. In that moment, Haru understood fully harmony was not simply maintained by action alone, but by awareness, patience, and the willingness to listen to the subtle songs of life, memory, and light. Chapter 6: The Storm and the Lanterns. A sudden wind swept down from the mountains, rattling the paper lanterns hung along the village paths. Snow began to fall lightly, dusting stone steps, pine needles, and rooftops. The river swelled, carrying ripples that shimmered under the lantern's glow. Haru moved quickly, guiding villagers to secure the lanterns and reinforce the bridges. The wind carried whispers of the groves past monks adjusting their robes, villagers carrying offerings, children laughing in fleeting memory. Shadows danced along walls and water, moving with purpose yet invisible to most. "Do you feel their guidance?" Rensho's voice was barely audible over the wind. Haru nodded. "It's as if the shadows themselves are showing me what to do, where to step, how to act." The storm tested his patience and courage. Snow piled high on rooftops, streams threatened to overflow, and paths became treacherous. Yet Haru moved with a steady rhythm, guided by the lantern's glow and the subtle murmurs of shadows and reflections. Hours passed, and as dawn broke, the storm subsided. The village was intact. Lanterns swayed gently in the morning light, and the snow reflected the glow of the awakening sun. Haru knelt by the river, feeling a new calm within him. The harmony of light, shadow, and life had survived the trial. Chapter 7: Harmony in Reflection. The morning after the storm, the village and temple gardens glimmered with dew and lingering snow. Haru returned to the hidden pond within the grove. Lanterns hung from pines, casting their soft glow on the water. The guardian's shadow appeared beside him, delicate and quiet. Haru knelt, letting the reflections of lanterns, pines, and shadows fill his vision. The pond mirrored not only the physical world but the song of life itself, the continuity of memory, action, and care. "You have endured," the guardian whispered. "You have walked through storm and shadow, through light and reflection. Are you ready to fully embrace the song of the grove?" Haru felt the weight and warmth of generations within him, the monks, villagers, guardians, and all who had walked these paths before. "I am ready," he said. The shadows moved, merging with the reflections in the pond. The lantern's glow intensified, not in brightness, but in harmony. Each flicker, each ripple, each whisper resonated within Haru's heart. The grove itself seemed to breathe, acknowledging his understanding. In that moment, he realized light and shadow, past and present, reflection and action were not separate, they were one melody. And he was both witness and participant. The lanterns were no longer just vessels of memory, they were companions guiding him forward. Chapter 8: The Balance Restored. Spring sunlight melted the last traces of snow, and the garden awoke with quiet vitality. Streams trickled again, moss grew lush along stone bridges, and villagers returned to their daily rhythms with gratitude. The festival lanterns, though no longer needed for the storm, remained as symbols of resilience and harmony. Haru walked the stone paths with a steady presence. Children followed him, carrying small lanterns, imitating his gestures as he showed them how to align the lanterns. So their reflections touched both water and stone. Elders nodded, recognizing that the boy had grown into something beyond a student. He was now a guide. Elder Rensho approached with calm steps. "The balance has returned," he said. "Not by chance, but by care. You have walked the path of light and shadow. Now, the garden breathes with you." Haru bowed. "I only listened. The lanterns, the shadows, the village, they all taught me." Rensho placed a hand on his shoulder. "That is why you are ready. Balance is not a gift given, it is a song sustained. You are part of that song now." The guardian's shadow appeared briefly, scattering petals across the path. The villagers gasped softly, sensing a presence even if they could not see it clearly. Haru smiled faintly, knowing it was a blessing, a sign that harmony had been restored not just in the garden, but in the hearts of the people. Chapter 9: The Lantern Within. As the weeks passed, Haru's connection to the lanterns deepened. He no longer carried one merely in his hand, he carried its light within him. In the stillness of dawn, when mist drifted over the temple rooftops, he felt the glow resonate in his chest, steady and unwavering. Rensho gathered the monks and villagers at the temple gate one morning. "Every generation has one who carries the lantern," he said. "Not only to illuminate paths, but to bring memory and care to places where it is fading. Haru, your journey must continue beyond this valley." The villagers lowered their heads in reverence. Haru's heart stirred with both gratitude and sorrow. He looked at the familiar paths, the moss-covered walls, the lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. This village had been his beginning, but not his end. That evening, the guardian appeared once more by the pond. "You have listened well," she said, her voice like the rustling of pine. "But the song extends beyond this garden. Other villages, other rivers, other lanterns wait for you. Carry this light, and you will guide them too." Haru bowed deeply. "I will honor the lantern, the shadows, and the song wherever I walk." The lanterns swayed softly in response, as though acknowledging his vow. Shadows rippled across the pond, merging with the glow until water, reflection, and light were indistinguishable. Haru understood the lantern within him was not bound by the village or temple. It was a living flame that could walk anywhere, illuminating paths wherever life and memory intertwined. Chapter 10: The Farewell of Lanterns. On the night before Haru's departure, the villagers gathered at the riverbank. Lanterns floated gently on the water, their reflections shimmering like stars scattered upon a liquid sky. The quiet festival had become a farewell, not of sorrow, but of blessing. Children released lanterns with laughter, whispering wishes for Haru's safety. Elders bowed low, their eyes glistening as they recalled their own youth and the continuity of memory. Even those who had doubted the boy now saw in him the harmony of shadow and light, and they too placed lanterns on the river. Elder Rensho stood at Haru's side. "These lanterns are their trust in you. They carry the village's voice, and you must carry it wherever your steps lead." Haru bowed deeply, overcome with emotion. The guardian appeared in faint shadow at the edge of the river, scattering petals into the current. For a brief moment, villagers caught their breath, sensing the unseen presence. It was as though the entire village, living and departed, had gathered in harmony to honor the boy. The lanterns drifted downstream, and Haru knew this was the village's song, and he would carry it beyond the valley. Chapter 11 The First Step Beyond. Dawn arrived quietly, with mist curling over the pine groves and temple roofs. The villagers gathered at the temple gate, waiting in silence as Haru prepared to leave. He wore simple robes, carried a staff, and held one lantern lit from the flame that had burned through the night in the temple. Rensho placed his hands together. "This lantern is not merely fire. It is memory, duty, and guidance. Let it burn in your heart even when the flame cannot be seen." Haru bowed. "I will honor it. Wherever I walk, I will carry its song." The villagers lowered their heads in respect. Children tried to smile bravely, clutching small lanterns of their own. The guardian's shadow flickered briefly near the garden pond, a silent promise that Haru was never truly alone. Haru stepped onto the stone path that wound down the mountain. Each step felt heavy yet full of purpose. The mist parted slowly, revealing valleys and rivers unknown. Behind him, the temple bell tolled once, solemn and steady, as though sealing his vow. The lantern in his hand glowed softly. Shadows moved at his side, quiet and harmonious. Haru inhaled deeply, feeling the breath of the grove within him. And with that, he took his first step into the wider world, carrying light, shadow, and memory as his companions. Chapter 12 Across the Riverlands. Haru's path wound down from the pine groves into valleys where broad rivers coiled like silver dragons across the earth. The morning mist followed him, lingering like a memory of the mountains. Birds darted through the reeds, their calls sharp and bright, unlike the subdued sparrows of his village. After days of walking, he reached a small settlement by the river. The people there eyed him with caution. Travelers were rare, and outsiders even rarer. The lantern he carried caught their attention. Its steady flame seemed unusual, almost otherworldly. A farmer approached him, hands roughened by years of labor. "Boy, why do you carry a festival lantern in daylight?" Haru bowed politely. "It is the flame of my village. It guides me, and perhaps it can guide others." Some villagers laughed softly at his strange words, but others felt a quiet stirring, as though something ancient brushed against them. Haru did not argue. Instead, he helped the farmers lift heavy baskets, repaired a broken fence, and listened to their stories without judgment. That night, when the villagers gathered for their evening meal, Haru placed his lantern near the river's edge. The children were drawn to it, their faces glowing with curiosity. One elder whispered, "It reminds me of the lanterns we once floated during our ancestors' rites, traditions we let slip away." By simple presence and patience, Haru had awakened something long dormant in their hearts. Chapter 13: The Bridge of Echoes. The next village lay across a wide, weathered stone bridge spanning the river. Moss clung to its edges, and beneath it the current sang an endless song of time. As Haru stepped onto the bridge, he felt the lantern's flame flicker, and shadows gathered gently at his side. On the far bank, a small shrine stood neglected, its roof sagging, offerings long forgotten. The villagers explained that once the shrine had been the heart of their gatherings, but over the years it fell silent. They no longer believed the old spirits listened. Haru spent hours cleaning the moss from the stones, arranging fallen branches, and sweeping the shrine's steps. Children joined him, laughing as they imitated his careful motions. Slowly, adults came too, curious, then moved by a sense of remembrance. That evening, Haru lit his lantern before the shrine. The flame glowed softly, casting gentle shadows on the walls. A hush fell over the crowd. For the first time in years, they offered prayers not in fear, but in gratitude. A breeze passed through the shrine, rustling leaves and carrying the faint sound of a bell that no one had rung. The villagers gasped, and some wept. To Haru, it was the same harmony he had known in the pine groves, the unseen voices of nature and memory answering when people remembered to listen. The bridge behind him no longer felt like a boundary but a passage. The villages on either side, once divided, began speaking of holding a festival together, united by light and shadow. And Haru, carrying his lantern, felt the path ahead widen, as though the world itself invited him deeper. Chapter 14: Whispers Among the Reed Fields. Beyond the river, villages stretched vast fields of reeds that swayed like waves beneath the evening sky. The air was thick with the sound of insects, and cranes stood motionless in the marsh, their reflections trembling on the water's surface. Haru followed narrow paths that wound between the reeds, carrying his lantern. Each night, the flame glowed faintly, a reminder of the temple and pine groves he had left behind. Yet the shadows at his side seemed restless, whispering indistinctly. He came upon a village half submerged by water. Floods had ruined their harvests, and despair clung to the people like damp mist. When Haru offered to help repair dikes and clear channels, many refused at first. "The river has abandoned us," they said bitterly. "What use are your words or your light?" Haru did not argue. Day after day, he worked silently, lifting stones, redirecting streams, carrying timber until his hands bled. Gradually, a few joined him. By the week's end, dozens of villagers labored together, laughter and encouragement rising where silence had reigned. On the seventh night, Haru set his lantern on the water. Its flame floated, steady and clear, while villagers followed with lanterns of their own. For the first time in years, the reed fields shimmered with light. Even the restless shadows at Haru's side grew still, listening to the harmony. Chapter 15 The Mountain Gate. From the marshes, Haru's journey turned upward into the mountains. The path was steep, lined with cedars whose roots twisted like the memories of ages. The air thinned, and his steps grew heavy, but his lantern did not waver. At the crest of the mountain stood an ancient gate, its wood darkened by centuries of storms. Travelers once passed through it on pilgrimages, but now it stood abandoned, half swallowed by vines. As Haru approached, the shadows surged, restless again, swirling around the gate like black smoke. He paused, gripping the lantern. Within him rose doubts. What if the harmony I bring is only temporary? What if the light cannot last? The flame flickered violently, but did not go out. Then he remembered Elder Rensho's words: balance is never static, it must be tended. Kneeling, Haru placed his lantern at the base of the gate and began clearing vines, sweeping fallen leaves, and straightening stones. Hours passed, and when at last he stepped back, the gate stood revealed once more, solemn and dignified. As dawn broke, light spilled across the mountainside. The shadows retreated quietly into the lantern, subdued yet present. Haru bowed deeply before the gate, whispering, "I walk with you, not against you." The mountain wind answered with a low sigh through the cedars, as if acknowledging his resolve. Chapter 16 The Silent Fortress. Beyond the mountain gate lay a valley where a fortress of stone loomed. Unlike the humble villages Haru had known, this place was vast and fortified, its walls rising high against the sky. Soldiers patrolled the gates, their armor gleaming, their faces stern. When Haru approached with his lantern, the guards frowned. "This is no place for wandering monks or dreamers," one scoffed. "Turn back." But Haru bowed deeply. "I seek only to rest and share what little light I carry." Inside, he discovered a people consumed by unease. Though their walls were strong, fear ruled them: fear of outsiders, fear of famine, fear of unseen enemies. Even their festivals had been abandoned, for joy was deemed dangerous when vigilance was needed. Haru offered no argument. Instead, he moved quietly among them, tending small gardens, mending clothes, listening to children who had never known laughter. Slowly, whispers spread of the traveler with the lantern who asked nothing, yet gave everything. One night, while the fortress slept, Haru placed his lantern in the central courtyard. Its glow spread across the walls, and the shadows danced along the stone like silent prayers. People gathered, hesitant at first, then in awe. For the first time in years, songs rose within the fortress, soft at first, then louder, echoing off the walls until even the guards joined. The walls still stood, but now they seemed less like barriers and more like guardians. Chapter 17 Shadows on the Plain. Leaving the fortress, Haru journeyed into vast plains where the horizon stretched endlessly beneath the sky. Here, the land was scarred, burned fields, broken homes, and villages abandoned. A great conflict had swept through, leaving silence heavier than any storm. The shadows within his lantern stirred violently, reflecting the grief of the land. At night, they spilled outward, forming shapes of faceless wanderers, their cries carried by the wind. Haru knelt among them, trembling, and whispered, "I will not turn from you." Days passed as he walked alone across the ruined plain. He buried broken beams, stacked stones where houses once stood, and offered prayers where families had vanished. The lantern's flame grew weaker, as if drained by sorrow, yet Haru pressed on. At last, he found a small group of survivors, a grandmother, 2 children, and a farmer too weary to speak. They looked at him with hollow eyes. Haru sat with them in silence, sharing rice from his pack, letting the warmth of his lantern spill across their weary faces. That night, the grandmother whispered, "Your light reminds me of festivals long ago. I thought such warmth was lost forever." The children, emboldened, placed sticks in the ground, hanging small scraps of cloth to flutter like flags. Even in desolation, they found a way to play. And so, amid the endless plains of sorrow, a faint but steady harmony began to return. The shadows no longer screamed, instead, they bowed their heads in silence, like mourners finally finding peace. Chapter 18: The Forest of Returning Echoes. After the desolate plains, Haru entered a deep forest where every sound lingered, repeating itself like a whispered memory. The trees were ancient cedars, their trunks wide enough for 3 men to encircle, their roots rising like frozen waves. Here, his lantern's light dimmed strangely, as though the forest absorbed it. When he walked, his footsteps echoed back not once, but many times, each echo slightly different, as if another version of himself walked alongside. On the 3rd night, shadows emerged from the trees, not faceless, but carrying his own likeness. They spoke with his voice, yet with tones of doubt and pride, regret and anger. "You seek harmony, yet you leave villages behind," one shadow accused. "You heal others, but who heals you?" Another whispered. "You fear being forgotten," said a third, "so you carry a lantern to be seen." Haru trembled, unable to answer. For the first time, his steps faltered, and his flame wavered dangerously. But then he remembered the villagers who had once asked nothing of him, yet still trusted his presence. He whispered, "I am not perfect. I stumble. Yet even in my stumbling, I choose to walk with others." The shadows grew still, then bowed, dissolving back into the lantern. The forest exhaled softly, and the echoes faded until only his true footsteps remained. Chapter 19: The Summit of Clouds. The forest opened onto high ridges, where clouds drifted like rivers of white. From here, Haru could see the long path behind him, the pine groves, the river villages, the fortress, the plains. Each place shimmered faintly in memory, as though the lantern held them all within its glow. At the summit stood a weathered stone altar, ringed by wind-bent pines. Here, the shadows emerged once more, not hostile, but solemn, countless forms rising like a sea around him. They carried fragments of every place he had touched: farmers, children, elders, soldiers, wanderers. Haru lifted his lantern. The flame pulsed, then split into many lights, scattering across the summit. Each shadow received a fragment, glowing softly as if reborn. The wind roared, but it was not harsh. It was a chorus of voices, countless and yet one. The shadows no longer clung to him, they walked beside him, transformed from burden into companions. Haru bowed deeply. "You are not my chains, but my teachers. Without you, I would not know the meaning of light." As dawn broke, the first rays struck the altar, mingling with the lantern's glow until sky and earth, shadow and light, were indistinguishable. For the first time, Haru felt whole. Chapter 20: The Return of the Lantern. Haru descended slowly from the summit of clouds, carrying the lantern that now held countless voices. The path downward was not lonely. He felt every step accompanied by those who had once walked with him: the villagers by the river, the fortress children, the mourners of the plains, the echoes of himself within the forest. At last, he returned to the Temple of Pine Groves where his journey began. The monks and villagers gathered, older now, their faces etched with time but glowing with recognition. Elder Rensho, frailer yet still steady, bowed deeply. "You have returned," he said. "I have," Haru replied, bowing. He placed the lantern upon the garden stones. Its light spread across moss and gravel, reflecting in the still pond. Shadows appeared, not as dark figures but as companions' memories woven into harmony with the present. The villagers gasped softly. Children reached out toward the gentle glow, while elders wept in silence. Haru felt no need to explain. The light spoke for him, carrying the balance of every step he had taken. That night, under the pine branches and the endless sky, lanterns were lit across the village. They floated along the river, their reflections mingling like stars fallen to earth. No words of command were spoken, no ritual imposed. It was simply gratitude, rising naturally, like breath. Epilogue: The Gentle Song of Pines. Years passed. Haru remained at the temple, not as a monk bound to walls, but as a traveler whose path sometimes led outward, sometimes inward. Children grew, villages flourished, and the lantern continued to burn with quiet steadiness. Never dimming, for its flame was no longer just his, it belonged to all who had walked beside him. In the evenings, when the wind moved softly through the pine grove, villagers said they could hear a song low and gentle, like shadows singing with light. Some believed it was the voice of the ancestors. Others said it was the harmony Haru had carried from the beginning. Haru himself, sitting on the garden stones beneath the moon, would only smile. He knew the truth was both simpler and greater. The song was not his alone, nor the pines, nor the shadows. It was the sound of hay itself, the quiet unity of all things, each voice distinct yet inseparable from the whole. And so, beneath the pine grove's endless song, the journey continued, not in steps upon distant roads, but in every breath, every reflection, every lantern lit upon the water.